Before I start, can I check that everyone in the room can hear me first of all? Yeah. It is a bit echoey. It's a bit disconcerting, Mandy, but we'll see how we get on. And I'm assuming that everyone online can hear us. Yep. Thanks, Andy. Perfect. So just a few announcements before we get going. So obviously the agenda pack's been circulated by ModGov. When you speak, can I ask you to state clearly who you are and if you're a councillor or an officer, and you'll please. Welcome to Nigel Behan and other members of the public. Thank you for coming along this afternoon. Audit Committee really works as an active process, so it's really important that we have engagement from members of the public. So thank you for coming along this afternoon. You're more than welcome. Please help yourself to biscuits. The meeting will be recorded by the council. That will be broadcast in the usual ways. Right, we have got a substitute today, so we've got Mike Stanton substituting for Simon Carswell, but we'll come on to apologies next. So I've had apologies from Simon Carswell and Mike Caswell. Have we had any other apologies? No? Perfect. So I'll move on to the agenda proper. So starting with the declarations of interest, and then before we move into public question time, I just want to say a couple of things if I can. So any declarations of interest from any councillors or other members in the room? No? Perfect. So why are we here this afternoon? I think that's a fair question. I don't think that anyone expected us to be in this position this early in the life cycle of the new council. We are merely, I think it's a couple of 100 days since vesting day, and I think if you'd said that we would be in this position at this point, I think most people would have been very sceptical. Clearly it's not a comfortable place for anyone to be in at the moment, but from our perspective, Audit Committee has an absolutely crucial role in assuring the governance and the financial framework of the council. So the role of audit is going to be absolutely critical going forward. And I'm sorry if I keep labouring that point, but it is worth noting. Where councils have run into trouble, largely it's Audit Committee that gets shot first. So it's my absolute commitment to make sure that Audit Committee is front and centre as part of this process, that we're asking the right questions at the right time of the right people. So as I've already mentioned, audit is an active process, so that relies on everyone to ask good questions, to make sure that they assure themselves if they have any concerns, doubts, or any gaps. So I will ask you all to make sure that you contribute as part of this process. Apologies for the change of time for this meeting. We've had to jig the agenda around quite a lot over the last few days to make sure we've got the right people in the right room, right people in the room at the right time. So you'll have to bear with me because we're going to bounce around the agenda in a slightly different order from the published pack. It's not ideal, but I will do my best to keep us on the straight and narrow. So without further ado, I'm going to open the floor to public question time. I have one pre-notified question from Mr. Nigel Behan on behalf of Unite Union. Nigel, you've got technically 3 minutes, but I will allow some leeway because there are lots of detail in your questions.
Has it been circulated?
Yeah, so your questions have been pre-circulated as to members. So we've got
thank you, Jan.
Read.
Who's the chairman?
Sorry, is somebody online I want to say something? Somebody got their mic unmuted?
Mike.
Yeah, thank you, Rosemary. So, Mr. Behan, the floor's yours.
Yeah, right, thank you, Chair. I'm not going to read it out verbatim because it'd take me more than 3 minutes anyway. But it's about the report that Jason didn't have time to publish. I understand why, because of what's going on. But it was an interesting report by Grant Thornton, and some of the features, I mean, in it obviously don't refer to Somerset Council, and I do acknowledge that. There's no intention of making any reference to Somerset Council, but the bigger themes around how local government is, and with all the councils now, each day some are saying we're in trouble, 114, and then etc. etc. So, there was one quote, I think, question one. This is the quote from the report. A common feature of failure is that those responsible for failing to adhere to rules, failing to be open and transparent, taking decisions without the appropriate expertise or advice, and taking ill-advised risks have frequently moved on before the consequences become apparent, leaving a difficult legacy for their successors, who will inherit intractable and financial governance problems. This applies to politicians as well as officers. So I'm basically asking, do you agree with that? I mean, obviously it's not referenced to Somerset Council. And then following on from that, implicit in the report is the reasonable assumption that local government is a provider of public services. And then I do a quote from the Local Government Association, obviously, which you were part of, and also about the real term, 27% real term cuts in funding since 2010-11. So what steps, measures, actions can particular councils, including this one, take to restore local government funding to levels that existed around 2010-11 to provide services that address service users' needs without further rationing expectations, etc., in addition to the challenges described above? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Behan. So I think I've got a response from the council by Councillor Leishon.
Thank you, Chair. These mics are very disciplined, only one at a time. Thank you, Nigel, for your two questions. So in response to question one, I would acknowledge the clearly stated comment from Grant Thornton that elected members can move on or move out of political life completely and leave others to deal with the consequences of their decisions. However, the opposite also applies, and I believe does so in the case of Somerset Council. So as opposition spokesperson from 2018 to 2022, I gained a great deal of understanding from 4 successive 151 officers and from seeing the actions of the previous administration as they dealt with the financial challenges that were evident during 2018, including low reserves at what was then the County Council. I'd also make the point that many of us in the current executive and administration, and indeed the wider council, have brought knowledge and relevant experience both from our professional lives and also from the district as well as county councils. So this current situation, this financial emergency, is clearly our responsibility, and we will continue our efforts to find a sustainable future for Somerset Council through the course of this 5-year term and beyond. I believe, Chair, that Mr. Vaughan will add a comment on this particular question.
Yeah, if I could just add a comment on the end of that. Each of the councils that issued a Section 114 notice has particular issues. They're usually just wider than the council's finances themselves, and do include some form of governance failures. As identified by Grant Thornton, councils have taken on lots of additional risks as they respond to the budget cuts over the last few years, and ensuring they fully understand and manage these is a key issue. As a new council, we've been very transparent on our financial position, with monthly reporting of our budget position, the regular updates on the budget gap for 24-25, and dealing with the outstanding audits from the legacy councils.
And then, Chair, if I may go on to question 2. So Somerset Council as a unitary is a member of both the County Council and District Council networks, as well as the Local Government Association. So while we acknowledge that some of the upper tier authorities hold more reserves and assets, the fact is that we're all facing the same challenges, and we do need to speak with one voice. The actions and statements must be across the political divide, as seen recently in the County Council Network letter to the Secretary of State. That letter was signed by 26 leaders of Conservative controlled councils, by the leader of this council, Councillor Bill Revans, along with leaders of Labour, Lib Dem and independent controlled councils. As it's now clear that the current national government, since the autumn statement, is very reluctant to address the reality of the local government situation, it's critically important that councils, through their networks, lobby all political parties. So the cost of social care, both for adults and children, and the broken primary funding mechanism that is council tax must be understood for this country to have any chance of providing care for the people who need it most, as well as the services and facilities that improve people's lives so much, and also maximising every opportunity for inward investment. That is a huge ask for local councils, and the challenge has increased in Somerset by local government reorganisation at this time. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Behan.
Thank you again, Mr. Behan, for your questions. Helpful and constructive as always. So thank you. So I'm going to move on to our next item, which was previously item 6 on the agenda, which is the General Fund Revenue Budget Monitoring Report for month 6. Nicola's going to introduce this item, and then we'll open the debate up for members of the committee. Yeah. Okay, Nicola.
Chair, I was just going to say that it was very welcome to see this month 6 report with the improved reporting through the use of Solver with Microsoft Dynamics. I realise we'll be looking to month 7 and indeed 8 very soon. But sorry, I'm not looking to upset anyone there, but the months are going by and we'll soon be into 2024. But thank you, Nicola.
Right, so we're on page 21 to 84 of the report pack.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Nicola Hicks, Service Director for Finance and Procurement. So bringing month 6 report to you, which was taken to the Executive in December. I think the key things to highlight, as Councillor Lation has just said, is that we were heading in the right direction in terms of an improved position on our forecast overspend from month 5. That said, you will see in paragraph, if we go into the main body of the report on page 23, you will see on paragraph 2 that together the overspend in children's and adults is 27.3 million, and actually it's the rest of the council that is forecast to be underspend of 8.6 million, which is bringing that net position down. So obviously we do have significant overspend issues in those areas. On paragraph 3, you'll see we've set up a number of establishment and control boards. These are working very effectively, I would say, to try and mitigate further in-year spend. The establishment and control board is not about freezing every single position that comes up in the council. It's more questioning whether we could do it in a different way, whether a permanent post is needed or actually a temporary position could be put in place. The commercial and procurement board is challenging around, is there a contract in place? Are we sweating that contract? Are we just accepting inflationary pressures that are being put on us by the supplier? So really challenging that. The spend control board is in place, which is monitoring every spend out of the organisation over £100. That is causing some resource pressures because, as you can imagine, there's a significant amount of expenditure going out over £100. But we are working our way through that. Aligned with that, we are implementing, as of next week, a no purchase order, no pay policy coming in. There will be exemptions to that, but if suppliers aren't on the exemption list, if they supply us with an invoice which doesn't have a purchase order on, it will be returned to the supplier. So that would be quite a significant change in process for us and allow us more control over how those orders are getting on our systems in the first place, in the contract that's in place for those. So that's a that's a positive to come out of the control board that has been put in place there, that actually we're getting on and implementing that. That said, I think we will continue to monitor the impact of that across the organisation as we go forward. As well as those 3 boards, we have panels in adults and social care that are challenging some of the spend and decisions being around in there, and the executive directors are involved in those panels, as well as a number of their other senior officers. But apart from that, I think you will see, if anyone has looked at previous budget monitoring reports, you will see an improvement in what we are actually monitoring in the presentation of the report. Table 1 on page 25 actually shows a RAG status from each of the services now, and we're looking at further improvements that can be made to that reporting in terms of bringing actuals in and looking at, actually, do we want to start reporting gross budgets, net budgets, actuals, to kind of give more clarity over the position we're in. But obviously, if we've moved to the new finance system and implemented the new solver to produce these reports, it's a learning curve still, and we are gradually making improvements as we're going forward. But I think kind of it was a very welcomed report, I would say, by executives, so I hope you'll be of the same opinion. There was a few queries that came in late yesterday, and I just wanted to hand over to Mal Locke, if I can, just to answer those queries.
Certainly, no problem at all. So for those that don't know me, I'm Mal Locke. I'm the Exec Director for Adult Social Care, and thank you for the questions that you brought to us. What I would say is, if there are any questions ever, please just come and grab me at any time. I've got an open door policy, and I'm more than happy to sit down with anybody and talk through our budgets, have a look at them, share with you how they are, what they're looking like, and the reasons behind it. But let me just cover the questions that you asked me. So first of all, first question was around commissioning. Thank you very much for noting that the overspend in one page said 1.3 million. It should absolutely have said 1.1 million, and that was a typo. So I can only apologise for that, and thank you for finding the typo. You keep reading these documents, and you don't always pick it up. So other eyes on that's great. There's also within there a £5 million savings for My Life, My Future, which has not been achieved. We always knew when we signed the contract that we wouldn't be achieving that in the first year. We always said that that saving would take us 2 years to do. So it's a 10 million saving over a 2-year period. They've been in with us now since, so Newton was supporting us, and we're working collectively together, have been with us since the last 4 and a bit months. We are absolutely on track to deliver the 10 million in 2 years. We monitor that. The last paper went to scrutiny last week, where we're showing the run rate so people can see what we're trying to achieve in that space. So again, that is being achieved. It's a 2-year funding of a saving of 10 million alongside that. You then asked me about direct payments and why was the number not quite the same. So what you've got is a 19.7 million full year, but projection of 14.2 million. What's the difference? Well, the difference is what we don't put in that is client contribution. So when anybody has any funding from us, or we fund somebody, we do a financial and benefit assessment on those individuals. And that part of that financial benefit is a collection that we make. It's an income that we get from people. So services aren't free at source. Everybody says they're all free. They're free to an extent dependent on whether people have got pensions, whatever the liabilities are, and that's taken into consideration. So that comes off. We also know that sometimes people don't spend all the money that we give them, and we take surplus back each year. So we normally get about 1.5, £1 million worth of surplus back. We know that's going to happen. It comes in different areas. It may be because somebody has gone into hospital for a period of time and therefore isn't needing their direct payment. There's lots of reasons behind that, but we know it's about that each year, but we manage that. So that's why that one will be different. You'll be able to see the income that comes into us as part of that, and that we place as part of that income. In terms of learning disability, and you've asked something around one of our paragraphs in here around 7.5 million overspend, and that there are 4 main pressure areas. What you'll see in there, there are actually 5, but 2 of them are probably been popped together there. So you've got residential, nursing. They're 2 different ones. You've got residential, nursing, supported living, and day services. So they're the 4 areas that you see in that space that we were talking about. They've just put commas between 2 of them. So we tend to look res and nursing, and sometimes wrongly we put it together. You then asked us a question around page 36 and around OPMH nursing. Let me just explain OPMH nursing. Oh, it is about older people with mental health issues. What we're talking about is for older people with dementia. Now, you'll know that some of you that may support people with dementia or have that in your families or relatives or friends, dementia is a real spectrum, and you're not going to need to spend so much sometimes, and then somebody's behaviour can increase and they can get quite agitated at times, and then then it sort of slips away again and they have nursing needs. So what you'll see in there is an average cost. So that is about an average cost in there, not the total cost. And some costs are an awful lot more. And so the graph shows the average costs, but some may be an awful lot more than that, and some may be less. So it's the average cost that we've played in that space. The differential will be the additional spend that we are spending on one-to-one support. And later on, you'll see we try to get one-to-one support out, but we do spend quite a bit of money on one-to-one support. And for some people, it can cost us for a period of time £4,000 or £5,000 a week to support somebody. We get some funding of health sometimes for that, but it is a complex situation in that area. And then next question was around the labelling on that states nursing placements and the assumption it relates to learning disability. No, nursing placements in this space relate to physical disability, sensory loss, and 65 plus, and mental. And you said, does it relate to mental health? The table just refers to physical disability, sensory loss, and 65 plus.
Mel, can I just stop you just for 1 second, just to clarify, for members, the questions that Mel's answering, the questions that Lindy, our independent member, submitted in writing before the meeting. So
before this meeting.
just to clarify, that's what Lindy's.
Sorry.
These are Lindy's questions. No.
I assumed you had them. I do apologise.
I don't know how widely they were circulated before the meeting. Did everyone get a copy of these, Michelle? No. Right, Michelle's going to circulate them now, just so that the answers make sense, but you can carry on, but I just wanted to...
Right, so this was page 36, so if you hadn't seen them, I do apologise. It was page 36, and it was a question around older people mental health nursing placements and the table, and then it went on to ask about the latest table states nursing placements. What does that include? So what I want to just say, it does not include mental health or learning disability. However, where somebody's need changes, and perhaps they're an older person, they're a person with a learning disability, but actually then they have dementia on top of that, and their predominant need then is dementia, they may slip into that category. So you may have some people with dual diagnosis or two areas for them that actually slip into that place, but not very often. So learning disability and mental health, where they are working age, is not in that space, or people with complex dementia. Page 37, you asked for, you talked about the mitigations that we have in place. So you'll see that the budget, there is mitigations that we have, we put in every year. So what we always do is try to manage our budget. That's what we do. So we know there will be an overspend often, and we put in mitigations to get that right down as we would. So is it been effective? The question was, well, we've saved £9.3 million with mitigations. That's what we've done in year. And give you some examples of that. So we've saved 1.4 million around complex placements, so our high cost placements, our one-to-one placements, we've saved that already. You reference in here reviewing void costs, and again, we've saved 0.3 million in those void costs. Let me explain what we do. So within adults, we have a look at what our spend is, we have a look at areas of efficiency that we can make year on year. We continue to do that. And we have a look at where our spend is perhaps different from other areas, and we learn from other parts of the country. And we say, actually, why is in that space? What can we do differently? So for these particular spends, we have thought, actually, we can make some savings. We need to be able to do that. We need to do it differently. We have a very large spreadsheet with all of this on, with all the mitigations, with the outcomes that we're trying to achieve. We have a board once a month where our finance partner joins us, and the relevant individual that we say it's your role to get that saving out and to work that through, they meet on a monthly basis, and then we feed that into our monthly report that we put in, that you see. So there's a process in place that we do that and a board that reviews that. But if you want some more detail on that, we're more than happy to sit down with anybody and share that and show that to you. It's fine. I think that covers all of the questions from an adult social care perspective. I'll hand you back.
Now, if I could just pick up the three queries that there were in relation to the children. So on page 39 and 40, it was picked up the fostering table, fostering underspend in the table on page 39 shows 0.7 and how this was in relation to the underspend of 1.3, but on page 40 it actually shows that there was an underspend of 1.3, but there was a pressure of 0.6 in this area. Therefore, that's why it's calculated a net figure of 0.7 because one is deducted from the other. So that was that query. On page 41, there was a question around the budget, last paragraph 47.3 at the table, page 39. I think this is in relation to the figures being shown gross and net, Lindy. So I think what's happened there is the 11.6 is a gross pressure and the 10.4 is a net pressure. So I'll pick that up as we go forward, Lindy, just to ensure that it is clear when we're talking about gross and net, so there's not that confusion over those. On page 48, you just queried DSG, and page 55 revenue reserves. Are these offset against expenditure on page 39? And DSG reserves do not offset the expenditure on page 39, but DSG is reported separately. That just answers all of the queries that were received in advance, but happy to take any further questions the committee may have.
Okay, so throwing it open to the floor, if there's any questions on the budget monitoring report for month 6. Andy?
Thank you, Chair. Just got a quick couple of questions. To do with the home placement, basically, we're looking at the level of care, and basically, we look at, I believe, Mel, we look at people's needs every year. We reassess them in terms of how many hours they need of sort of domiciliary care. So what, I think we do it yearly. So how many people have we not assessed their care? Because obviously some people will go up, obviously, if we assess it and say, well, actually you need a few more extra hours a week. Hopefully some people may come down. But do we have a figure of how many people we need to look at to assess it each year? Thank you. That's one question.
There we go. So we have around 8,000 people that are in our service, and all of those should have an annual assessment, that they should have an annual review. So it's not an assessment. So we do an assessment when somebody joins us, when a new person comes to us, and then we normally know what their care package is going to look like because we've done that assessment with them. They've got their support plan, and then we review that unless their needs have drastically changed, and then we'd probably do another reassessment. So yes, we do that regularly. From a care home or care at home placement, so where we support people at home in their own homes, well, there's two things we do. So the best person that are going in that home day in, day out is the care provider, because they know them far better than we know them. So we do have a conversation with our care providers, and they do it very well to actually, if they see a package needs reducing, they'll come and talk to us about that. And we have a methodology in which they can reduce the package without asking us about 5 hours and put it up by 5 hours. And then they come and talk to us about that. So if there's a different need, if something's gone wrong in that family, there's a real need for it, they can do that for up to about 2 weeks. And then we work with them to talk that through. From a reablement point of view, so say when somebody comes out of hospital, they may have a reablement package, so they may have a package to support them, but we expect that package to reduce. At the end of the day, we do expect that to reduce. The question you asked me is how many people are waiting for assessments today and reviews today? A large number, about 800 people within this county are waiting for assessments or reviews. That's a fact across the country, and it's a fact in Somerset. We cannot get enough social workers, occupational therapists to support us. We've got lots of tools in place to monitor that, to manage it, but there is a waiting list in both areas. So that's why we've got our trusted assessor model in place to help us with that. What we do know, though, is that the amount of hours that we are supporting people with has increased in their own homes. So we used to support people about 12 hours a week of care in people's homes was the average. It has now gone up to 14. That's national. It's gone to 14.9 this month. That's national. We would expect that if we're trying to keep people at home, which is a lot better for individuals. And if you do the right thing for individuals, the cost of care is better because it costs a lot more to go into a residential and nursing placement. So that's why we try to do that in that space.
Mel, sorry, before Andy jumps in, can I just ask you a supplemental on that? So you said that care providers can increase or decrease the size of the package by up to 5 hours in either direction. Are there any controls on that? Because I'm in particular thinking about care agencies. We're sort of relying on trust there that the care agency is not going to inflate the number of hours that the client needs. So obviously every organisation is under commercial pressure at the moment, and it's a way of potentially increasing revenues for the providers. So what checks and balances are in place there to ensure that providers are being scrutinised when they're putting in those additional hours?
There we go. So what you normally find is they've reduced the hours, not increased the hours. Care workers are a scarce resource, as you know, for domiciliary care. There is enough work out there for them to work twice as much as they're currently working. So for them, it isn't something that they normally do. However, they have to come back to us after 2 weeks of increase of anything and report that to us. We'll then have a conversation with the family, with the carers, and just work out the reason why we may send somebody out to do that. We also know if there are a care provider that is doing this more often than others, because we also track that. They're not. We tend to, although we have a lot of care providers on our books, we tend to, the majority of the care that we provide is about 10 care providers, and they're our trusted assessors. We enable them to help us. We have to, and they do. The idea is to keep people as independent as possible, and that's what they want to do. That's the ethos behind how they work. So we do check it and we do audit it, but actually we're not finding that to be an issue. And if it was, we would have a really good conversation with that one care provider that may not be doing what we need them to do.
Okay, that's helpful. Andy, you wanted a supplemental?
Thank you, if I may. On page 37, it talks about self-funding under the reviewing interim placements. Now, going forward in the future, obviously, as a lot of people do own their own homes now compared to people in the past, and they'll have a bigger asset. So obviously the government set out criteria to how much you can have as assets or income or savings before you have to contribute towards your care, your care needs. So how do we make sure we're actually paying? We're not paying for self-funders who should be self-funded, because obviously your main objective is to care for them, so you need to get care sorted out. How do we make sure then we do the paperwork to make sure we get the money back if they've relatively wealthy, they've got plenty of savings and they should have contributed to it? How do we make sure that the council's not out of pocket? Thank you.
So what we do is we have a financial and benefits team that sits in our finance team now, which is the right place for it to fit. And we also have an online system now that people can report into and do report into. So we check everybody that they haven't got over our threshold, that they will be self-funders or not. However, you will know that when somebody comes out of hospital and they become on a reablement package, which is funded by both health and care and ourselves, actually they get up to, and I'm going to make sure I say up to, 2 to 3 weeks, hopefully, of free care at that point, and we'd reassess at that point. They only get the free care whilst they're getting the reablement. Now, what you'll often find is families say, oh no, I need a bit more. And we'll say, no, it's time now. It's your responsibility. You will have to continue this funding. And sometimes the families say, well, I don't want it anymore. We're not prepared to pay it. That is their choice because they are a self-funder. And that's some of the complaints you might hear out there is local authorities are not going to fund this. No, they're not, because if you've got the funding yourself, then that's what we expect you to do. But there's always a bit of a balance there. You'll also hear sometimes things like reluctant discharges, and that's where people choose, they are going to be a self-funder from hospital, we all know that, and actually they choose not to leave quite as quickly because actually they don't want to pay for that support going forward. So we do manage it. We have systems in place now from our financial and benefits team that actually go out, make sure we are reviewing and working that through, so that we can try and get the maximum income. And you will see later on in our reports where we're looking at how do we manage the system next year, that we're looking at increasing that fees and charges, as we call, by about 2.5 million next year. There is only one caveat I would say to you, is government have just notified us of a change in the way that we can collect fees and charges. So, for example, they may well be taking into consideration spouse pensions as part of it and things like that. We take that into consideration now, but there may be some tweaks that we're just pushing back at government to say, what is the effect if they do that on local government?
Sorry, Mel, could you just turn your mic off, please?
Thank you. Could I just ask a supplementary on that one? Are we getting any sight of people having trusts set up now to avoid paying? Because we see it in the newspapers that people are setting up trusts and they say to you, come to our company, they advertise it on the internet saying that, you know, we can save you money for your care fees if you set up a trust, or people are actually putting their properties in their children's names with basically deprivation of capital in terms of they're saying they've got no money, but effectively they passed it on before they've died. Thank you.
Yes, of course we are. But what we do is there's rules around it, and we understand the rules that sit around it, and we do challenge where we can. But there are ways of doing it, of course there are, and people will do that.
So bringing Jason in.
Yeah, I was just going to make a comment actually, just to clarify a couple of things. In terms of, remember, this is an audit committee, but not the scrutiny committee. So the line of questions I'd say has been fine, because we've been talking about things like risk controls, those sorts of things, but just need to be careful that we don't stray into audit committee, off of audit committee territory into scrutiny committee. The other thing I would say is that I can see she's sat there now. We've also got Claire Winter, who's the Executive Director of Children's, Families and Education, joined us as well. So as well as Mel being here from adults, we've got Claire here to cover the children's side of things as well.
Thank you. I'll come back to you in a second, Lindy, but I just want to ask a question of Nicola. So you're safe, Mel, don't worry. And that is whether the de minimis level on the spend control board was set correctly. So is £100 really a good place to draw the line? Should we be setting it higher? Because you already mentioned the scarcity of officer resource at the moment. You know, it feels a little bit on the low side.
Very interesting question. I'm not sure how to answer that in terms of myself and my executive director sat next to me had a challenging debate about.
It's fine if you've got a difference of opinion, but let's hear both sides of the argument.
Yeah. So I think for me at the moment, what I would say is we have got everything under review over £100, but given the volume that we are experiencing, we do tend to look towards the bigger values rather than the lower values. So I think we are having to triage how much, because when you're talking about 300 orders going through a day and you've got an hour in a meeting to sift them, you do have to kind of pick and choose a little bit. But we are seeing patterns, we are picking up patterns, we are picking up repeat offenders. And after Christmas, we are going to start targeting the people who we feel aren't listening to some of the guidance going out. So we will start getting even more unpopular than we are at the moment.
Okay, over to Jason for the other side of the argument.
And what is the right figure, I suppose, is the question. That there isn't one as such. We have deliberately chosen a low value, actually, of £100. It is a low value, because we're operating as if commissioners were in running the council, and I'm afraid that's what they would do. It would be down to the £100. So that's where it's come from. I think one of the things we will do, though, going forward into the new year in particular, as this is bedded in and we kind of know the areas now to have more focus on, should we say, we will look to see whether we adjust that. And I think one of the other things we'll do is speak to the councils that have actually been through the 114, so the likes of Slough and Croydon, etc., to see how they adjusted things or didn't adjust things as they're going forward. So it's our starting point. That doesn't mean that will continue on, but it is changing behaviours across the council, and that is a good thing. We are trying to push people to use purchase orders. That is something that has been a really poor discipline, and that is being addressed as part of this work, with some more work coming in next week to really force that through. And the organisation is complaining, and I'm going, good. And that is a positive thing, I'm afraid, in terms of that. We are seeing less invoices going through the system. So this is having an impact. We are spending less money as a result of it. So yeah, it is pain.
So is the amount of spend which is being effectively challenged or reduced being tracked anywhere? Because it would be helpful to know what impact the control measures we put in place are having.
Yeah, so we are tracking things. We are trying to track things that are turned down. That is a little bit challenging because when you turn something down, they will push back. So that's more challenging to then keep a track of what you then let through. But what I would say is we are running reports around kind of our payment run values to see how they're differing from where they were a month ago. But I don't want to make a huge industry of monitoring this aside from the already monitoring that's in place.
I mean, that's a fair answer, Nikki. I mean, we have to ask the question. Okay, Linda, you had a question.
Thank you, Chair. With regards to the answers, thank you for my questions. Just to make a comment on that. So where there's a table, there should be a reason, like the contributions made by some of the patients that would result in the difference. There should be a sentence to explain it, so it's easy to follow from the actual cost to why it's 5 million difference. So then just to put those explanations that was said in the report, like Nicholas said on your net and where you admitted to maybe being more clear, so it's easy to follow. Then a general comment on the report as a whole. For me, besides the fact that there's 2 months already passed, I know the difficulties with the system, but it's already retrospective. And the format of the report is like an annual report where you explain differences between budget and actual. So it gives us like after the effect view of what happened. I thought this meeting would be where we as a committee look at the finances, look at the controls that's in place, and then give advice and guidance on maybe additional controls to mitigate spend. The report, with not trying to bash it, it's a good report, but it's like in retrospect and not proactive. We should see controls like on Appendix 1, there's some mitigating controls, which I thought was good. And the comment that we also get that there's behind the scenes work that is available. I would have thought those ultimate savings, to show the savings, that's what we would discuss today, if it makes sense. And on the other appendixes, there's no real mitigation shown or what's going to happen in future to mitigate the costs.
Nikki, do you want to come back?
Yeah, thank you, Lindy. I'll pick up some of the comments you've made as we do further iterations to the report. I think we brought here the monthly budget monitoring report that went into executive. I didn't adapt it, especially for this committee. But I think if this committee would like to see things, more information around controls that you can feed into, I'm happy to take that away and look at what the layout and content of that would be to bring it back to yourself. I think in terms of the time lag between this being a month 6 report and it going to December, we are looking at that. So we have struggled, I will admit, with a new finance system. We've struggled to get the information, to get it out in the timely cycle, and also what we struggled with.
Sorry, Ashley Richards, can you put your microphone online, please? Thank you.
Sorry. But and what also didn't help is I think the democratic table of when things went to scrutiny and the executive weren't quite aligned in the correct way. What we're doing is, although we've committed to bring monthly reports to the executive, what we've actually done is we're not proposing to take a month 8 report. What we're proposing now to do is month 9, a quarter 3 report in a much quicker way, so it will get to the executive much quicker, so that we will get rid of that lag in data. And I think as we develop Solver, which is our budget monitoring tool, we will be able to see that we can get that out in a quicker and a more effective way.
Thanks, Nicola. Okay, Tim, I would like to move on because we've got external speakers. So if you can make it a quick one, then
No,
I'd
very
like to
quickly,
sum
I
up and
just
move
wanted
on
to
that.
come to the £100 limit. I've been worrying about this. I think there is a draw on officer time that is unreasonable. But one thing I just wanted to clarify from what you said, there are patterns that you have seen. Would you say that you would have found all of those patterns if that amount had been higher? That's my question.
Oh, that's an interesting question. I think no, we wouldn't have seen those patterns because predominantly the spend under £1,000 we're seeing still going through is room hire, training that's still going through that actually being, and also what we're seeing is a high number of retrospective orders. So they're getting the invoice and then putting the order on the system, which that's very hard to stop that. But I think what's happening is we need to break that cycle of the retrospective ordering and kind of say get some communication out there to say what is allowable, what isn't allowable, because not everything, even if you have got strategy services, not everything in that service is strategy.
Thanks. I've got Mandy.
Thank you, Chair. I'll try not to go into too much scrutiny work, but sometimes assurance and scrutiny are very closely intertwined. So hopefully the questions won't stray too far for you. You can tell me off if they do. So just the opening of the report in point 1, actually, to me, it was a misleading opening paragraph saying there was an improvement of 8.6 million from the previous forecast. I think it would have been really helpful just again to put a sentence in there because much of that was a one-off clawback from BT. So it's not an overall improving of the main pressures, i.e. adults and children. So I would have welcomed that front and centre of the report for those that don't read past the first few points. It's just for clarity for everybody. So just moving on. So my first question probably is for adults and children's. When the budget was set, if we looked at the outturn for children's last year, and I've asked this question before and I will raise it again because I think it's important. The outturn last year for children's was 128 million. And the new budget for this year was actually 123. So you were setting the budget this year at less than last year's outturn. That was for children. So my first question to children's and to adults directors was, were the budgets set right on day one? And the reason I asked that is by month 1, both were well overspent. So that's my first question. Thank you.
Okay, so I was actually going to formally welcome both Claire and Mel to the meeting and the next item, but it seems that everyone's so keen to talk to you that that you've already been thrown in the deep end. So I'll ask Mel to answer on behalf of adults first, and then we'll move to Claire. Okay. Mandy, you need to turn your mic off.
I'd much prefer you to leave it on. It's always difficult, isn't there? Because with any of our budgets, we have savings attached to them as well. The challenge for us in adults and across the country has been in adults is the price of care. And the cost of that care has grown dramatically from what I expected it to do. So we thought budget setting, we could probably make it at 750. We can't, and that's the price of care, that's the cost of living that has grown. Particularly here in Somerset, we were a really low fee payer. You were fully aware that we were a low fee payer. We're now paying still less than around us. So some of that has been pushed up because of that. Could we predict it? Not all of it, no. So there was always going to be, it was going to be tight, but it's even tighter because of that. So what we've done for next year, hopefully, is if it is agreed and all the rest of it goes on, we've really gone back and rebased our budget, something which we haven't done for about 10 to 15 years in adults. We've gone back to client by client, cost by cost, and trying to rebase our budget in that way. The right thing to do so that we don't end up in this position again. But that's where we are.
Okay, and Claire?
Sorry. So the situation for children's is similar, but not the same. So it was always going to be tight. And the issues for children is the increasing complexity of children's needs, which we didn't predict adequately. So although the numbers of children in care have remained roughly the same, with roughly the same age profile, and we have there's an increasingly older children in care population, the older children's needs have become much more complex, partly as a result of the pandemic. So there's significantly more very high levels of self-harm, very high levels of violence in that population. In order for those children to be cared for appropriately, there are not very many providers in the country who will do that for lots of reasons relating to Ofsted regulation, where they're worried that they will lose their registration and therefore their business if they look after children who either hurt somebody else very badly or hurt themselves very badly, usually the key reasons. We are very market-led, and the market at the moment is, I would say, a bit like the Wild West, in that there are a lot of providers out there. There are a significant proportion who are private equity backed, whose profit margin is over 30%, and they are charging as much as they can in a market that is very broken. So for the most complex children in the country and in the most complex children in our care, we did some analysis of the costs above CPI last year. And for the most complex children last year, the percentage cost above CPI was an average of 83%. We could never have anticipated that. And that's a picture that's being replicated all around the country. CCN have done some data analysis that's about to be published on that. And it's a market that is very, very difficult to predict. We have tried to mitigate that by developing a strategic partnership with the Shaw Trust to deliver children's homes fostering and therapeutic education provision for the most complex children, which is about the 30 top children in terms of cost in the county. That is already delivering. We started that in January this year. That's already delivered nearly £2 million of savings against the costs for the 12 children who are in that provision now, with an anticipated another 6 to 7 children in the next year. But as I say, in terms of could we anticipate whether that budget was going to be sufficient? Yeah, at the time we thought it was, but the demography and the landscape of the care market has changed significantly and continues to do so.
Thank you for that. I would say that I don't think there was any way, given all of that, that you were going to be able to have a lesser budget this year than there was the previous. And I'll just leave that on the table. I've said it before. I just think it's something we need to bear in mind when setting the budgets this year. So my next question is around, there's a comment on page 30.25 about overstated income budgets. So can somebody explain the background, perhaps give an example, and is it corrected? Point 25, page 30. If I've got my notes right.
Sorry. So overstated income, we have found that some budgets from legacy councils that were fed through into our amalgamated budget were overstated, particularly in relation to income from the commercial investment portfolio and dividend income from those investments.
Potentially quite large figures then.
Yes.
Thank you. Bit of a red flag there. And my next question is around the alignment of budgets. I know that was a challenge because all the legacy councils had different bits of budgets elsewhere. So is there assurance now that the budgets are aligned correctly? And my second question, because anecdotally I hear comments, does every area of this council now know what its budget is and that the allocation is sitting within the right area?
So you're correct that it has been a challenge, just purely because the 5 councils were very different structures. The services were sat in very different areas of the council across the 5. So it was quite challenging pulling that together. Also, as we were trying to build a new budget structure, services were still being shifted around in terms of the actual structure of the new council. So that created quite a challenge, along with the new financial system. So I would say we are in a far stronger position. I'd say we're probably 95% there in terms of where the budgets are sat. Are they in the correct place? There's still a few discrepancies and there's still environments that are just being mocked up. The issue we've had is that people, budget holders, services were looking for budgets that were potentially not there as well, where the districts chose not to fund it or didn't have a kind of ongoing budget there. It was a once-off funding, and therefore that didn't follow through into the new council, and that's caused some issues just in terms of people expecting there to be a budget. I would say every service has had their budget. I think just in terms of the information that's being gone out, we are just collating in terms of the consistency around what executive directors and service directors are receiving. We have had a few inconsistencies across our team in terms of how they were working with each service, but we are aligning that new, and we've appointed our new head of business partnering is looking at how that can be aligned even further.
Thank you very much. Next question really is around transformation savings income generation, which is covered in Appendix 9. So I am concerned that 72% are forecast to be delivered in Q1, and that's only gone to 73% by Q2. So very little savings wise has improved across Q1 to Q2. Appendix 9, page 79, if you're looking. So with all savings, you know, if you can't meet something, then an alternative needs to be looked for. So have alternative savings proposals come forward? I'm not seeing a level that would pick up that shortfall. There's no mention of increased income generation, and personally, I'd rather see income increase rather than a service reduced. I'll stop it there. Actually, I've got one more question after that. Thank you. So concern is around delivery of savings not being delivered and things being put in place.
Okay, Jason, would you like to take that one?
Not particularly. And the biggest one that you'll see in the bottom of page 79 there, which is in the room, so it's around adults, and that was around the Newton savings. That was £10 million over 2 years, and the profile we put in the budget was 5 and 5. And clearly, once we signed the contract and further work had been done, we will achieve the 10 million. But that profile is wrong. 4.8 million of that won't be achieved in the current year, but we still do expect to receive the £10 million savings next financial year. So that's the biggest one on there. You're right on the other ones in terms of, you know, if people can't deliver some savings, they are expected to find alternatives. That obviously is challenging, and I think one of the disciplines we're trying to get into this year's budget is that people, we put not only just risk profiles against the savings, we also look at the contingency we hold. And I think it overall an area of monitoring the savings we do on a quarterly basis through the budget monitoring reports. I think we're looking at how we can strengthen that going forward, and certainly get scrutiny more involved in making sure that we have delivered on the savings, because the other area overall that we struggled on is on the LGR side of things. You'll see that mentioned there. The non-staffing side of LGR, I would say, is pretty much on track of that £18.5 million ongoing savings. The managerial savings from the top 3 tiers of the council target of 2.9, we achieved 2.6. That was reported to council in July. the extra 300,000 was added to the further £1 million from other staff restructuring. That has not been achieved. And there is another £4 million built into the 24-25 budget as well. So a total of 5 million expected to be delivered next year. So that's an area of high risk at the moment.
So thank you. And I'll just, for me, say where I'm at, I guess. So for me, I had concerns about what the budget was set at, given knowledge of the previous year. And I think that was demonstrated clearly by month 1 and 2 going straight over. Actually, it hasn't deteriorated much since month 1 and 2. It's been more static. There's a lack of delivery on all the savings that were put in place. That's a concern in terms of assurance. And I think if you bring that back in with the restructure, certainly of staffing, that has been acknowledged that it's been slower. And I think the uncertainty with staff, and there are several major project lines here that are going to put huge amounts of works onto staff. And my concern is again about resilience and numbers of staff to deliver this. So from the assurance point of view, I think we're all right to be concerned, and I remain concerned, but I thank the feedback from adults and children. I understand the pressure the whole organisation is under. Thank you.
Was there a, sorry, Mandy, was there a specific question in there, or was it more of a statement? Sorry.
I think for me, it's how we can get that assurance as an audit committee, what we need to do moving forward to gain that assurance. I don't have an answer to that, but I think it'd be worth even an offline conversation with the committee to look at, is there anything else we can do or ask for that will help with the assurance. And so we're absolutely clear we're doing all that we can to help and support the organisation.
So just to be clear, I think I'm in the same place with you around assurance, particularly of these 2 high risk areas. It feels like we need a deeper dive. So Mel was talking about the confidence interval on delivering the Newton savings. So actually, I think we probably need a bit more assurance around exactly what that looks like. I mean, I'm not really sure I understand the project, and I don't necessarily need to understand the project in its entirety. What I need to know is, are they delivering the savings that we were setting out to deliver? What does the procurement look like in terms of risk? So are we on the hook for the to pay them whatever we've agreed to pay them, even if they don't deliver the savings, etc. I think we need to understand a little bit more around that. It feels to me like we're almost at the point of actually having a bit of a task and finish group from audit to look at that. Is that so? Oh, sorry, Liz. Does this relate to my concern? Yeah.
It does, absolutely. Chair, one of the things I've asked for recently is the budget figure and the outturn figure for children's and for adults from 2015 up to the projected figures for this year. And it's very interesting. I only received it late yesterday, so I've not had time to really digest it and understand it fully. But I think it would be something of interest to this whole committee and possibly scrutiny too. It is not as straightforward as you might think. There are a lot of red minus figures all the way back to 2015, 19, and there are more years when the budget was set below the outturn figure from the previous year than you might imagine. So I think this is a really good piece of work that's been done, and I would very much like to share it. I need to understand it better myself first, please.
Yeah, so we've got the data and we'll circulate that, but just to give you an idea, so just picking children's because it's on top of the spreadsheet, children's total budget has been overspent in 8 out of the last 9 years. And the going back as far as 2015-16, sorry, 16-17, the opening budget was set below the closing budget of, sorry, the outturn of the previous year, and the same for the following year. And that's quite a consistent trend. But we'll circulate the data, and I think it's helpful that we've raised that as a question, because I think you're absolutely correct, Mandy, that actually I'm not assured that the budget setting was robust enough to begin with. But we are where we are on that at the moment. So I was just going to ask, sorry, Mel, I'll let you come back because I did ask a direct question of you.
In terms of the Newton work, I'm more than happy to bring it here, but just remember it is going to scrutiny every quarter. So that's where that is reported to. But you know, so there's a decision about how do we do that, and within that we report exactly where we've got to, the run rate, what the programs of change are, and that's all gone there, including the signing of the contract, how that contract was made up, etc. So that has been going there on a regular basis. But I'm more than happy.
I'm pleased to hear it's been going to scrutiny as well. From our point of view, given that both adults and children's are the key strategic risks, the financial viability of this council, we need to assure ourselves that the cost controls that are in place are delivering against what they've been budgeted to deliver. So I think we need to do a bit more of a deep dive to understand that. I mean, I suggested a task and finish earlier on. Is that something that there is any general support for?
Can I just ask our finance officers actually whether there's anything they would find helpful for us to have a look into? They're under the skin of this, they're doing it every day. Is there anything this audit committee can offer to help to look at? I just thought I'd ask the question.
I haven't take that way and give that further thought. I mean, there is an awful lot of activity going on. If I take the adults figures first of all, the number of times we've been through the demand modelling this year, I personally have been through it at least 3 half-day sessions on it, and have looking forward to the joys of doing that again. But there may be some points actually, Mandy. So if I can reflect on that and come back to you, that might be helpful actually.
Chair, if I may, I don't know with what we've got in front of us whether it's even possible to get assurance. I suppose, what do we need to do to get it, and is it possible to do that?
Okay, I think probably what we need to do is to take this one away and think as a committee about how we can go and get some of the assurance that we need, possibly working with SWAP to look at what the best practice might look like in this area, and seeing if there's anything that we aren't doing that we could be. Is that a reasonable action to take away? Yeah, fine. General assent? Yeah, fine. Okay. I have still got a queue of hands. I rudely missed out Habib, who was going to ask a question earlier on. We're very sorry about that, Habib.
Need to apologise, Mr. Chairman. It's just I get that on a regular basis, A couple of questions, if I may. Perhaps one for Jason here. It is important, and we've seen the assurance given in terms of revenue budget being closely monitored, and on a monthly basis we have an update. Will it be worthwhile having the same sort of thing on the same report on income generations? Because it is important to generate income. It's not just one side of the spectrum we're concentrating on. So if I may suggest that on a monthly basis we actually look at how we generate more income for council, that we can go forward, and potentially if there are projects that members can come up with, and members of the public can come up with, we can actually look at that and see how we can actually progress that, because that is the other side. That's one question. The other question is for Mel here. I think it was mentioned that care providers are the best people to tell us what is needed. I always thought families were, genuinely, but where families are not there, perhaps care providers are the best people. But what I like to understand is what conversations are being had with the families, and see if some of our costs can be reduced by them taking some of the burdens, or work proactively with them to ensure that that happens. Thank you.
Could that potentially be straying into to scrutiny territory there a little bit on the second question, Habib? I think maybe if Mel answers that one outside the meeting with you privately, but the first question was, can we get more visibility of income generation at this committee?
I mean, the short answer is yes. The budget monitoring report does provide both the expenditure and the income side, and we are looking at how we can make that clearer going forward. So, you know, our budget monitoring is we are a 1.5 billion pound spending organisation, so you therefore have 1.5 billion pounds worth of income coming into the council. That's the size of organisation we are. If we're drilling down into, it depends what you mean by income, are we drilling down into commercial income or income raising ideas that there may be about us doing things? There is a bit of a reality check around our capacity to do things at the moment and focus on what I would say is the big ticket items. But I'm not quite sure exactly which bit you're driving at, but we can certainly provide the information to members.
Ooh. Sorry, wrong button.
If I may, Mr. Chairman, yeah. If I may, Mr. Chairman, there are a number of opportunities. I can give you a few. In terms of park and rides, we have park and rides that sometimes they're sitting dormant, so we can actually go out there and see if there are operators that they can come in, you know, and I'm sure there will be, you know, a number of operators will be willing to go in there, and then thereby we increase our income, you know, drive-through, takeaways, that sort of thing, that brings us enormous amount of income. Parking, you know, we have a number of car parks within the whole area of Somerset. Some, excuse me, some of them actually lend itself for further development whilst retaining the existing parking. But those ideas are actually, they don't cost us money, they will generate. But I think it is important that we can actually look at those things.
Thanks, Habib. I think Jason and the team take that away.
Yeah, just to add, I think some of those things would be really helpful to split, you know, perhaps not audit committee, but scrutiny committee, the corporate resources scrutiny committee in particular that deals with the budget. So, you know, it might be that we speak to them about, you know, is there a session or is there a way of actually getting those ideas? Because you're right, members, we've got 110 members who've got a lot of experience across the piece in lots of different areas, and actually grabbing members' ideas on those sort of things could be really helpful for council going forward. But I would suggest that's possibly through the scrutiny route rather than audit, but it's a really good suggestion.
Thanks, Habib. So I'm conscious that Claire's got to go to a meeting at 2:30. So I think we need to press on if there are any further questions of Claire in particular. I would like to ask both Mel and Claire about the support from a finance perspective that you're getting to ensure that you are kept up to date on how your budget is progressing, to check that you're getting the right level of support from the team, if there's anything extra that we could do to help support you to deliver.
So from an adult's perspective, she sat next to me, so I'd be rude about it if I needed to, but I don't. So from an adult's perspective, I'm getting a great deal of support from our business partner. I think the challenge for us as a whole finance team is a single point of failure, maybe if Penny wasn't around, and have we got the depth in her team below her to be able to deliver? Right now, she's about and no problem whatsoever, but that will be a challenge for us in lots of different areas across the council in the future.
Okay, so and there is a potentially a risk there, isn't there, around single point of failure, but there's also as the single largest spending directorate within the organisation, is it just Penny that we've got to support the finance function, or
you have a team underneath Penny that is, but it's a team which is gaining experience, let's call it that way, and I think that is what we need to just make sure we've got enough underneath her. It is one of the bigger services to do that, but nothing I'm saying here is something that Jason or others are fully aware of.
Okay, and to Claire.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd say that the children's finance team was somewhat inexperienced, and we have brought in an external consultant to support. We haven't, Jason and Nicola have brought in external finance expert to support that team, to help them develop their experience so that we can be confident as we go through about the financial projections and how we manage that. The person who's come in is an expert in demand modelling, which is what we've previously lacked, I think. So that's been really helpful in helping the finance team to be able to understand what and project better in terms of what we need to do in the future.
And presumably we're growing our own internal experience and skill set using that external consultant to help empower the team to be able to do that demand modelling in the future, or are we relying solely on external consultants for this activity next year and beyond?
No, we're growing the team to be able to do that themselves, or finance.
Chair, can I just point out we have Siobhan in the room, sat next to Penny over there, so she's the same as Penny and supports the children's area.
Thank you. Okay, so if I can just ask the committee if you are content to move on from this item, yeah. Would the committee just like to note the contents of the report? Yes. Happy. Okay, so we are running a little bit behind schedule, but as I say, I've only got Claire in the room until 2:30. So, sorry, Claire, I haven't quite finished yet, I think, because we're moving on to the budget. Sorry, it's the general fund budget and capital programme update, which was previously agenda item 8. So, Jason, I think you were introducing this one. I'm conscious, Barry, that we have got an external speaker online. So I just want to ask the children's related components of this item now. So if we can save general questions, we'll swap to Grant Thornton, external speaker, and then we'll come back to this item to allow Claire to leave. Okay, Jason, did you want to reintroduce the children's related component?
Well, I do a very short intro on the whole budget and industrial children. So page 101, I would say, is the main area of focus and looking at the recommendations. So this report went to scrutiny on the 5th of December, to the executive on the 6th of December, and goes to council on the 20th of December. So we're ticking all the boxes on every single committee virtually. Just a couple of things, just work through each of the recommendations. So number 1 is around going to full council and also approaching DLUC around a capitalisation direction to help set a balanced budget for next year. I've had 3 meetings with DLUC. The last meeting was very productive. We've now got a key contact at DLUC dealing with us, and we've actually received the application for a capitalisation direction this week, so we know what we've got to complete by when. The second recommendation in the report is about the consultation process. That started this week and runs to the 22nd of December. Sorry, 22nd of January, get the dates right. Otherwise, it's a very short consultation. The third recommendation around the reserves, and there was a publication error with not the full details going out, but the reserves is not a completed picture in terms of we are doing further reviews of reserves to free up reserves, and we'll take that back to the executive in February. Recommendation D is that the 15th of January Executive Committee receives an update and will receive details of all the savings proposals. So they will then to recommend them onto scrutiny on the 1st of February, and also details of the finance settlement, which we will get Monday and Tuesday next week. Recommendation D is around the vision for a sustainable Somerset Council on page 117 to 120. Sets out details of a major restructuring of the council and a new focus for the council going forward, and that an outline business cases produced for the January executive. And then the final one is to note the capital programme. So that, I think there's a recommendation to summarise what is quite a long and detailed report and update and budget gap, but they're the key things.
Fine. So I'm just going to open the floor for questions to Claire about children's services, if there are any. If there aren't, I will allow Claire to disappear. Mandy?
So I'm trying to race through my questions and find the children's ones. So looking towards next year, I think it's about 20% rise in children's. Why, and is that affordable? looking further into the future. So looking forward to next year's budget. They're looking to have an almost 20% rise in the money that children's services needs. So why does it need 20% extra, and is that sustainable moving into the future?
Okay, so the rise relates to the increased complexity of need, as I described earlier, which we are, as in every other local authority in the country, is struggling to manage. I don't think that we will need that level of increase in subsequent years, because the Homes and Horizons project particularly is working very effectively so far, and that will have volume impact as we go through the forward year. The other element that we need to improve hugely is the number of in-house foster carers. We don't have enough in-house foster carers for children who need a family home to live in a family home. So by default, are having to place children in residential placements when they really don't need residential care, they just need a family. There's a lot of work going into the in-house fostering service to increase that. It's slow progress, but we are making progress on that. So it is starting to bring down the number of children who are in residential care, and obviously the cost of that will reduce as children come into in-house fostering. So there will be a reduction in the need for the increase, if you see what I mean, in future years. And we have modelled that, or finance have modelled that, and I'm confident that modelling is reasonably accurate from what we know about the demography and the projection of the type and number of children who are likely to be in the care system. That is our largest budget. That's the largest area of budgetary increases, external placements.
And just to follow up on that, there's lots of talk within the paper about not doing much prevention, and the sort of prevention element of the work that the council does sort of being reduced. What sort of impact do you think that will have, especially in early years, really?
So I'm very clear, and I think the council is clear, that in children's services, some aspects of preventative work are absolutely critical to preventing the escalation into statutory services. We have a commitment at the moment for those services, such as the Family Intervention Service and other early intervention services, to be retained on the basis that they are extremely good value for money in terms of preventing the escalation into statutory services. So the Family Intervention Service has an 8% re-referral rate within 7 months. So it's very effective at holding those children below the social care threshold and therefore preventing the rising cost.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any final question? And I can only take one more for Claire, and then Claire has to go. Okay? No? Claire, thank you for being here this afternoon. It's been really helpful to understand firsthand the challenges in your service area. I think it would be prudent for us to perhaps ask for both yourself and Mel, as the two areas of greatest financial risk, to perhaps keep your availability open for the next audit committee meeting, for certainly for January, and possibly for the next few months, just because we want a little bit more assurance around both of these areas. I'm really sorry, I know you've both got a lot on, but I think this is somewhere that actually this is the key financial risk for this authority, and we have to get a little bit more assurance that the budget controls are both in place and working, that the financial support you're getting is sufficient, to make sure that that we can assure members that whatever budget is set is deliverable. That is absolutely critical for everyone. Okay, it's not about pointing fingers, and I just wanted to say thank you to both of you. It's been really helpful to have you here, so thank you again. Please grab a biscuit on the way out. Without further ado, Barry, I would like to ask you to introduce our next item, and then we will come back to the budget monitoring report. Okay.
Thank you, Chair. So,
did you also have to leave now? It would be helpful, I think. Thank you. Barry.
Thank you, Chair. What I'd like to do is introduce my colleague, Guy Clifton. Sorry, I should introduce myself. So I'm Barry Morris. I'm the key audit partner for the audit, the external audit of the council. Now, Guy Clifton is one of our directors that has worked for the firm for many years and is a specialist in local government value for money work, and he's written a number of reports. The current report, Preventing Failure in Local Government, was published last week by us. And again, it just reflects back on some of the findings that we've identified on a national basis. I won't steal Guy's thunder, but just to let members know, this is a national report. The local value for money report, which will be included within our auditor's annual report, is going to be shared for the next audit committee, and we will be sharing that with officers in the next day or so as a treat just before Christmas. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Guy.
Thank you, Guy. Welcome.
Thank you, Barry, and thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, members of the committee and officers and others in attendance. Can people hear me okay?
Loud and clear.
Great. So what I'm going to be doing is sharing some slides. I understand, Chair, I've got about 15 minutes. Is that the case?
Yeah, you talk for as long as you need to, and we'll manage the rest of the agenda.
Thank you. So I'll be talking some slides. When I'm talking to the slides, I can't see you, even if you can see me. I'm happy to take any questions once I've concluded going through the slides, and I'll be arranging for those slides in the associated report to be shared with members of the committee following my presentation and following the meeting. So I'm just going to try and share my slides, and if you can let me know when they're visible to you.
Yeah, they're visible to us. If they could be a bit bigger, that would be helpful.
Yeah, so yeah, is that okay?
Excellent.
Right. So as Barry said, this report is fairly hot off the press, came out a week ago. The slides have a URL for when you receive this in person. Before I sort of go into some, and I'll be summarising the key findings. What I've got here is to note really that whilst local authority failures, significant failures remain rare, that they're certainly not as rare as they used to be. The research that's gone into the report includes sort of identifying issues from either government intervention, auditor intervention, not just necessarily Grant Thornton, and where there's been 114s or Section 5 notices issued by those relevant statutory officers. As such, during the research, we spoke to the representative bodies that make up what's often called the golden triangle of statutory officers, so head of paid service, Section 151 officer, and the monitoring officer. And those bodies were Solace, Lawyers in Local Government, SIPFA, and ALATS. And ALATS is the umbrella body that sits over the various treasury societies that are in place nationally. The report examines the themes that relate to these issues, and we look at the causes, and then we look at good practice, and we look at opportunities for preventing future failures at other local authorities. We note that the act of issuing a Section 114 notice or Section 5 notice may not in itself represent failure. This is quite an important point. The statutory officers concerned and responsible for issuing those notices typically act with integrity, often with personal bravery, and in some cases are responding to organisational decisions that took place before they were enrolled, sometimes a considerable amount of time before they were enrolled. But nonetheless, of course, the issuing of such notices are clearly signifiers of past or present organisational failure. And I'm just going to move on now to the first part of the summary, which is the causal factors, and they're grouped by themes. So firstly, we looked at structures. Now, these are themes. They play their part, not necessarily in every single local authority failure, but they often play the part in a number of them. So council controlled companies, local authority controlled companies, where they have been ineffectively either established or the governance around them are inappropriate, can and has caused challenges that have led to some local authority failures. I've talked about the key role of the statutory officers. where we've identified failures, and the 151 officer or the monitoring officer, the MO, are not sat at the top table at the senior management team, not having that opportunity to fully discharge their statutory roles has been a contributing and causal factor. Where we see an over-reliance at the senior officer, senior leadership level of many interims, including statutory officers, has also played its part. And more recently, combined authorities and the sort of the extra tier of local government that some places have all, and their perhaps lack of full integration or full understanding of local government has contributed to some areas of failure. Externally, and Barry mentioned that we have a history of doing many of these national reports. They typically focus on the local government sector as a whole. This one is slightly different, that we look at the system more generally. So as we go through the summary findings, you'll get a further appreciation of that. Local government has to deal with multiple central government departments, doesn't it? So it's not just DLUC, but it could be DFT, DFE, Department of Health and Social Care, etc. So that lack of a single line of sight, if you like, from central government on the sector to identify and manage failures before they happen is a particular weakness. And it probably doesn't need Grant Thornton to tell you that in recent years there has been quite a significant churn in ministers and civil servants, and of course that continuity of understanding, and there's been a recent one in terms of the local government minister, hasn't there, in the most recent reshuffle. So that continuity of relationships and understanding, we believe, is also or can be a factor in identifying and mitigating potential failures. Next, we looked at causal factors that related to systems, and there may not be some surprises here on the internal factors on the left, but ineffective risk management, internal audit weaknesses, and that could be sort of not focusing on key areas of risk. It could be not completing all planned internal audits. It could be not following up on recommendations for internal audits. Those are key areas that have contributed. Members not fulfilling their responsibilities. So this could be at a number of different levels. Obviously, the full council is the body that is ultimately responsible for making sure that safeguards are in place and managing risk, but it could be across the executive, scrutiny, or indeed committees such as yourselves. Lack of commercial expertise, and there's a relationship between this and the local authority companies, but over the last 10 years or so, many councils have endeavoured to become more commercial, taking riskier investments, for example, and in doing so without the effective commercial expertise, without thinking about what external due diligence do we need before we make these significant investments, has also contributed to some of those recent failures. Externally, again, you don't need Grant Thornton to say that there have been significant reductions in local government funding over a period of years, and that has impacted on the capacity of many local authorities to manage some of these increasing challenges, both from service provision, but also managing external challenges in the economic environment that we're all within at the moment. As part of that, the government, and it's not unique to this government, it's happened over decades, but there is this habit, isn't there, of having area-based funding pots, competitive funding, many different funding pots that local authorities have to invest time in to compete and hope to be successful in. A number of high-profile failures recently have been in relation to levels of borrowing from government via the PWLB, and the controls around that perhaps need to be strengthened, and caps need to be considered for individual councils. And resource constraints on regulators, and that includes external auditors such as Grant Thornton. The impact of delays to opinions being signed is well versed and well known across the local government system. Moving on to the next causal area, which is behaviours. So in an increasing number, I mean, we're responsible for 184 local government and related value for money reviews every year, and we're seeing an increasing evidence of issues around leadership, relationships between either senior officers and members or between members, and that is becoming an increasing issue. And where that happens, organisations, councils typically take on a more inward focusing look and lose the capacity and the ability to take a grip on some of those really important operational issues and challenges that most councils face. Optimism bias or willful ignorance, willful blindness. So this is sort of a link to sometimes we see sort of an exceptionalism. You know, what we're doing, you know, others may not be able to cope with or manage, but we're different. Our council is different. So managing that optimum bias and willful ignorance is really, really important. And it's a feature in a number of, for example, public interest reports and other statutory interventions in recent years. We've already touched on this one, but you know, statutory officers, and by that I mean the MO, the 151, and the head of paid service, and particularly the first two of those are really, really critical to make sure that the organisation, the council, you know, sets a balanced budget, doesn't take illegal and unlawful decisions, and it's tough. It's a very tough role, particularly in those circumstances and contexts. But there are examples where statutory officers haven't done that, and their successors have come in and had to pick up the pieces. I've already talked about commercial skills, but another sort of red flag is a lack of transparency on decisions being made behind closed doors, or otherwise not having effective scrutiny permitted on decisions are other causal failures. And externally, there are many, and I mentioned some already, there's many bodies that represent professions or the sector as a whole, and we believe that can dilute the messages to government in terms of a consistent voice across the sector. Moving on, I'm now going to move on to good practice. When I've reread this, it feels like there's nothing in here that's particularly earth-shattering. It's common sense, but the fact of the matter is where there has been failure, these areas of good practice have not been evident. As already mentioned, it is full council that ultimately is responsible for putting and ensuring the safeguards are in place for proper stewardship of public funds, etc. But where members are not well informed or trained, they don't have CPD or you know, other types of support, and the resourcing of the support of the of elected members is ineffective, can lead to the you know, contribute to the causes of local government failure. Not allowing enough time for the depths on key decisions. One recent review we undertook, there was the most significant investment the council had ever taken by scale and complexity. The council met, they then ended the meeting, overview scrutiny then started, and then council came in and made the decision, all on the same evening. So clearly that didn't allow for effective time for have in-depth scrutiny and discussions on what was a very, very significant investment that ultimately led to significant challenges for that local authority. It doesn't need us to say that the executive needs to have the appropriate capacity, competence and commitment and are aware of their responsibilities, but this isn't always the case, and where that isn't the case, there is that risk of organisational failure. I mean, ultimately, in any organisation, public or private or third sector, when there is large-scale organisational failure and you were to root cause it, typically it does go back to leadership, and that could be senior officer and or political leadership. Moving on to overview and scrutiny, it's really, really important that there is a respect for that function by the executive and full council, where it is seen as being you know, somewhere for putting members that perhaps don't have the appropriate roles and skills and capacities and is not treated seriously, again, a bit of a red flag. So overview and scrutiny, it's really important to have an effective forward plan, have sight of the executive forward plan so that it can be clear on the strategic issues and focus of that committee or indeed group of committees, and it has effective support from officers to meet its wider responsibilities such as call-ins. And then audit committees such as this one, having an independent chair is good practice. And again, like with the other member bodies already mentioned, having appropriate training and offer support is critical. Having an audit plan that does focus on key strategic risks and priorities, and curiosity is really, really important from all of these, but it's highlighted in relation to the audit committee. And be prepared to challenge internal audit and external audit. And the flip side of that is to respect those as critical friends to the committee. Moving on to good practice for some roles, and the first three is that golden triangle. For all of these, it's really, really important that these officers undertake CPD, pay attention to their development needs, and seek independent or external advice where appropriate. Seek peer support, mentoring, use the professional bodies that are available to each of those statutory officers. We believe that ideally the monitoring officer should be legally qualified. It doesn't have to be by the statute, but we think that that's good practice wherever possible. And finally, internal audit, and this sort of touches on some of the observations I've already mentioned, but do focus on key risks, complete your audits in a timely way, do follow up on recommendations, and do ensure the organisation needs to ensure that internal audit is an appropriately resourced function. So it all seems like common sense, doesn't it, all of that? But as I've said at the start of these causal areas and the good practice, where it's not in place, it can lead to contributing to failure. I mentioned earlier that we're looking at the whole system, not just local government. So we do have some recommendations, if you like, for non-local authorities. The National Audit Office is currently conducting a review, as it does on a rolling cycle of the code by which all of local audits has to abide and consider strengthening it in light of the recent failures. Auditors such as ourselves, we really do need to complete our audits, both value for money and the opinion work, in a timely way, identify risks and report promptly on those to the audited bodies. The LGA has built on some recent changes to its corporate peer challenge. If traditionally it was at the discretion of the local authority concerned whether they made the report public, if they don't, then the LGA now will publish that report, so there is appropriate transparency on the findings of the peer review. They need to continue the work they do on sector-led improvement and the training and development and peer mentoring, etc., of members within the sector. CIPFA needs to consider its oversight activity and its sanctions regime. How are the individual officers who have these professional qualifications held to account by their professional bodies is something we believe could take a closer look. In this case, we mentioned CIPFA. And of course, whilst most Section 1.5 officers are members of CIPFA, not all are members of CIPFA. So what does the Institute need to do to make sure that their oversight and their regime covers all Section 1.5 officers, 151 officers? And Solace, so Local Authority Chief Executive Society, they need to make sure that there is training and particularly an understanding of the other statutory officers' roles, not just the chief officer's head of paid service role, and consider a mechanism for removing their accreditation of officers in those roles where appropriate. So greater accountability is a bit of a theme on the officers there. Moving on to those professional bodies that I've already mentioned, LLG, etc. They're very good at supporting their members, but what they're not so good at is talking to each other, sharing and networking with each other, providing support to each other, and understanding of what these different statutory officers do. In individual councils, it's good to see regular statutory officer meetings outside of the senior leadership group. This recommendation is aimed at those bodies so that they better join up to consider how they can support their individual memberships. DLUC, we believe that the Redmond review, which has only been partially implemented, the government should accept the recommendations in full, including having a single system oversight. There is an ongoing consultation on minimum revenue provision that needs to be concluded and guidance given, and something that has been on the cards for several years now, a review of the sector funding regime does need to happen. HMT, which is the government department responsible for the Debt Management Office, which currently manages PWLB, they need to continue their work in strengthening their due diligence on borrowing requests from local authorities, and as already mentioned, consider a loan ceiling on individual councils. So, in summary, we believe that most councils are still well run and most councils have avoided significant failures, but there are increasing sector challenges both internally and externally that need to be managed. The legal framework, for example, in relation to those 3 statutory officers I've mentioned, dates back in some cases to the early 70s. You know, is that fit for purpose for the 21st century? And as I've already mentioned, there needs to be that review of the funding system. As I've already mentioned as well, if you root cause failure, it tends to go back to weak leadership and its impact on organisational culture, a key finding. So we recommend that everybody with expertise, powers or duties should consider the safeguards in place and what they need to do both individually and collectively to ensure there is robust, effective and strong collective leadership. Part of why we published this and similar reports is that we're sharing lessons learned from our experiences of working in the sector. And it's important that individuals and organisations understand the lessons. And obviously, it's great to be invited to present the findings to the Audit Committee today, because that's clearly an indication that you are keen to understand those lessons from elsewhere within the sector. And finally, as I've already touched on, it's really, really important to have effective collaborative working across professions, hierarchies, and between organisations to support good governance and financial management. So I'm now moving to questions. Before I switch off my slides, I will mention that we're planning a number 2 report, local government failure, preventing failure in local government number 2 report in January. So watch this space for that one. That will provide a greater level of detail for local government in terms of the actions they can take to prevent failure, and we plan to include a number of case studies as well. So I'm just going to see if I can get out of sharing my screen. Hopefully that's the case, and I'm happy, Chair, to take any questions people may have.
Yeah, Guy, would you be able to circulate the slides? Yeah, that's
yes,
okay.
Chair.
And
absolutely.
Barry, I assume you will inform us when the second report's been published and circulate to the committee as well. Yeah, perfect. So I think on behalf of the whole committee, Guy, I'd just like to, well, I'm sure that they're all unanimously in agreement that we should sack me as the chair. So thank you for doing that. So I'll open the floor to questions. If anyone's got any. Mandy?
Thank you, and thank you for the report. I don't think reading it, if you've been following councils around the country, I don't think any of that's rocket science or would come as a huge surprise to anybody in the room. There are some councils that have had one-off sort of challenges that are peculiar to them. But looking at what you've covered there, are there any councils you would consider that have issued a 114 but have not fit within any of those criteria that you think they failed on? So are there any that have failed that you think really shouldn't have, and is there a reason behind those?
Councillor, if I understood correctly, I think what you're getting at is, has a well-managed council failed, or has a well-managed council been in the position of having a 114 notice issued? I think my answer, if that is the correct interpretation, is no. At the moment, I know within the sector there is an increasing view, not necessarily held by the current Secretary of State, that there will be sometime next year a well-managed council that has a section 114, but I don't believe that any that we've seen in recent years fit that criteria.
Andy?
So to come back then, you're looking at this in the council so far, your view is that if you do everything right, if you follow all the guidelines, you're managed well, etc., you're fully aware, then you shouldn't hopefully have to issue a 114, and that's certainly the case at the moment. Is that what you're seeing?
I'm saying that those 114s in the last few years are as I've described and fit the themes within the report. It is open to conjecture at the moment, Councillor, if there is going to be a well-managed council that has to issue a 114. This is a backward-looking report rather than a forward-looking report.
Thank you. I know that was a tricky question, but it's just trying to think, if you've done everything right, if you've followed everything, then hopefully you can carry on.
Certainly, if you follow the sort of the good practice in this report, you are certainly going to do your best to mitigate being in a position of failure, being a failing council.
Thank you.
Thank you, Liz.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to point out the unfairness of council tax. Both the council tax base, so the number of houses in each band, and the council tax rate. And then when you put that against the demography of a council area, you do get some kind of structural unfairness. So I'll quote our 151 officer who said councils are all facing in the same direction. They're all moving in the same direction. It's just not a straight starting line. And that for me has been really helpful to get that into my head, because if there's one thing that I think is failing in this country with regard particularly to social care, it's council tax. So we're using a property tax from the early 1990s, where there have been massive changes in different parts of the country at different proportions, and we're expecting that property tax to pay for services for people. And I think it's failing miserably. And I don't believe the government so far, and I'm not sure that any future government is really thinking about this enough, is how we're going to get through the next years with pressure on social care growing as they have since COVID. So I'm sorry, I'm not asking a question, Chair. I'm just saying there are some factors that are beyond our control in this council and other councils.
Chair, I appreciate that may have been rhetorical, but if I can take the liberty to respond. So I think that point plays to the wider point the report makes, which is the need for reform of the finance system. I don't think it's just council tax, it's business rates. You know, business rates, if I'm a local business and I'm paying my business rates, I accept that I've got to fund refuse collection, investment in public realm, car parking, etc. But business rates is being used to contribute to social care and other services, in effect. So I think the whole system, the report makes it clear the whole system needs reform.
Thank you. Any final question for Guy? Mike?
Thank you, Chair. I'm looking at Lindy as I say that, given one of the recommendations. Thank you, Guy. Particularly apposite and useful and accurate report. As Mandy said, I should confess that I'd spent the last 40 years working on leadership and organisational change, 15 of them with one of the big accounting and consulting firms. So it's very good to hear good, well-researched recommendations coming back, and particularly on mentioning the need for curiosity, the importance of culture and the importance of learning, especially from mistakes. My question is about transition. Three kinds of transition, really. Transition to unitary from multiple former councils, transition in the changeover of the chief executive, and change of party control. And we've had all three of those at once. I just wondered whether your research indicated, I mean, obviously they all create a risk in their own right, so three together multiplies the risk. But particularly the special problems of transition to unitary, it would be useful to hear if there's anything that you learned about
that. There hasn't been, well, the research didn't pick up significant failures in relation to post-LGR local authorities. We did, I mean, one of the points I made was around interims of senior officers. So we we pick that up where it might be chief exec or it might be section 151 officer, and clearly where there is multiple changes at a leadership level, and the report talks about officers rather than elected members, then clearly it can contribute, can't it, to failure. A lack of continuity, a lack of organisational knowledge, those sorts of things can be contributory factors, but we haven't yet picked up anything in relation to local government reorganisation. Having said that, it is a significant challenge for Somerset and other geographies that have been through that recently. The timescale in the run-up to investing day was quite short, wasn't it? And just the amount of work that's required for the safe and legal from day one, but then the transformation that can take place beyond that is significant. So it's something we're watching carefully, and we may report on in future reports, but it doesn't feature LGR in this current report.
Thank you. I have just noticed that Councillor White has a hand up online. Ros, did you want to ask a question?
Thank you. We appreciate the slide projection, and I know that it's slightly different to no doubt the full report, but I was interested around the limited attention you pay to the impact, and maybe it's because it's the result of your findings rather than anything else, but the cost of competitive tendering in time diversion for government funds is quite significant for many councils, especially if they're not successful. And in my area of responsibility, we've had to tender for an awful lot of levelling up grants, high street fund grants, etc., etc. The list is numerous number of competitive pots of money. And I just wondered whether or not that when you do your case studies, you could perhaps flesh out the impact of the cost of tendering. It is really, I think, a significantly underestimated impact on council resources. And the second thing is, I appreciate that it's one of your findings at the end, but I do think that the failure of altering business rates and also council tax, which Councillation reflected on, does make quite significant impact on the success of a council. If you look at the comparative ability to raise funds on 2.99% against a national interest rates that have been historically over 10% for the last 18 months. And again, I appreciate this is a retrospective report, but I hope that with your next report, you could perhaps play that out a bit more in terms of the impact on council's ability to, I have an area of responsibility where in construction, and we went through a period where we couldn't even hold a quote for steel for more than 14 days. And therefore trying to work in the public sector against those sort of inflationary construction demands was very difficult. I appreciate all of these may be de minimis in the overall picture, but I do feel that you need some sort of balance in playing out, because hopefully it won't be just councils who will learn from your report, but government too. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, on the first point around bidding for funding pots and our second report, I will feed that in with colleagues who are leading on that. And on the second one, we are sort of regularly reviewing our pipeline of potential national reports. And again, I'll make sure that that gets fed into the next discussion on that.
Perfect. Guy, thank you so much for coming along to talk to us this afternoon. It has been really helpful to hear the findings of your report. We look forward to reading the second report when it comes out. So thank you again, and good luck with the publication.
Thank you, Chair. And if it's okay with you, I'll leave the meeting.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine.
Yeah.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye now.
Thank you. Right, folks, I don't know if everyone's content to move on from that. I think it was helpful to hear a national perspective, and I know that Alistair's also been looking, just disappeared for a moment, also been looking at the I think it was the SIPFA self-assessment for audit committees to see how we're performing against that. So we'll come back to that later. So I want to jump back just to cover the primarily the adult social care elements of the budget for next year. So back to item 8. And then I promise, Mel, you can go in as soon as we're done with questions. All right. Sorry for, well, thank you for your patience. So particularly for adult social care related questions relating to next year's budget. Are there any? I'm sure there are. Mandy.
Thank you, Mel. Similar question to children's, really. We're looking at 69.6 million of pressures for next year, and hopefully the 10 million from Newton. So that's a massive rise across your portfolio. I'm just trying to work out how you've got to that, and do you think that's the right figure?
So there's nationally, we've done an autumn survey as part of ADAS. So one of the roles that I also play is the use of resources for nationally for ADAS. So I tend to get lots of figures and do lots of meetings in this way. So it is an advantage. But what it talked about there is it's a complex mix of high inflation, increased needs, complexity of needs, and that workforce challenge. And what that's done is a costly increase. You know, it's really important that we've increased the living wage. It's great that they've done that. However, that wasn't funded. And just for us in Somerset, that would be an additional 5 million on what we know currently today. So it's the complexities that's sitting out there, the demand on our budgets, the challenges that we're all facing. I think the other part of it that we're also noticing, and you're seeing nationally, is the undoubtedly increase for adult social care due to some of the discharges from hospital, due to the speed in which we've done that and the complexity of individuals. So there is some underfunding from NHS that has been slipped into us as well. So all of those three issues, and that's a national issue. It's we've discharged people from hospital quickly, we're placing them in residential care and nursing care, and we've not got them out. And that's a historical problem we've had since COVID and continue to have. So I think all of that has meant that our budget, along with the fair cost of care, so the fair cost of care exercise was there to change the way in which we deliver care across the country. That got stopped. However, the impact of that nationally is that we all produced a fee rate that we said was the right fee rate with our providers. We worked on that with our providers. That's what we were asked to do, and that's what we did. We looked at what the real cost of care is. And although we haven't moved to that, and we certainly haven't been funded that nationally, we've had to move in that direction, rightly so, because we now know the cost of care. And that has presented us with the problem we've got. Alongside that, the fact that we are now rebasing the budget for adults, you will see that we have been out of kilter for many years. We've been having a 14, 15 million pound overspend, 13 million pound overspend for many years. We've had a lot of one-off money coming into adult social care. So when you see that chart, you'll see there's a couple of years where we weren't overspent over COVID, and we had a massive amount of COVID money came into this local authority. Again, one-off money. So what we're seeing nationally and here in Somerset is a system which is broken at the moment, and the challenge is how do we change that and what do we do? Is the budget enough? My one concern, and I'm going to be honest here, is the changes in that are coming in April for overseas workforce. The only reason we have managed to stabilise the market nationally and in Somerset is the overseas workforce. The reason the overseas workforce are coming, or a lot of them, is because they can bring their families with them, which really supports us, because actually half the families work in the rest of the services in Somerset. So it's really good for us. If we stop that in April, if that does happen, which it may well, that will be a problem for us, because if you look at agency costs, so agency costs for a nurse for one shift will be £1,000 at least. of an agency for one night shift. That then affects the cost of care. The cost of care is only stabilising in the way it is because of that. So that's my only caveat that I will be putting on this at all times.
Thank you, Mel. Mandy, do you want to come back and then I just want to say something? Sorry, can you turn your mic off, Mel? Sorry.
Thank you. Just one very quick follow-up. We've got a large number of outstanding assessments, which we touched on earlier today. If they could be an unknown, what's in those assessments? Has that been factored in? Thank you.
So nationally, there are about 250,000 assessments outstanding at this moment in time. It is a waiting list of nothing else. You can see that, and that's nationally recognised. What we do though in Somerset, because we will all of us will have waiting lists, we have quite a robust look at those that are immediate need and those that aren't. We haven't robustly done that. However, what we've done as setting this budget is looked at the demography coming in, what's coming in, what we expect to see. We know the amount of people that come in and come out of res and nursing care. We understand that model. We've been mapping our rates of deaths for a long time, so we manage it in that space. So I think we're as good as we can be. It is a waiting list. There will always be a waiting list unless we can increase our staffing, or not that we need the funding to increase our staffing. It's just the fund that the staff are out there, and right now they're not. So
Perfect. Any final question for Mel? If not, Andy, quick one.
Thank you. Just a quick one. Talking about the NHS, because we've now got the integrated care board, we're working together. Do you feel that you're getting enough money from the NHS to do our activities, or do you believe we're getting our fair share? Do you believe that we can get more out of them in one sense, that they could cough up a bit more, Mel? Thank you.
we are one system. They have got as much of a challenge of their finances as we've got as our finances. It's about working together. It's about having the right preventative measures in place for individuals. It's making sure that our primary care services are working really well, and that we are doing prevention early on from a health and social care and transforming the way in which we work across Somerset and nationally. We are working with them to make sure that the amount of money they get and that we get actually is maximised. So we're doing that. Is there more they could give us? Of course, there is always, if they had more money themselves, and that's the challenge.
Perfect. Mel, thank you so much for coming along this afternoon. It's been really helpful to have you in the room. So I wish you a happy Christmas, and we'll see you hopefully at some point next year. Thanks, Em. Okay, so I just want to open up to general questions now on the budget for next year, and then we will take a short break, and then we'll try and wrap up the rest of the agenda, if that's okay. Okay. So moving on to general questions on the revenue budget and capital programme for next year. Was there anything that the officers wanted to say, or was your summary earlier on comprehensive? You're happy?
I'm happy with what I said in terms of, as long as we finish by 4 o'clock, then we'll remember briefing at 5 o'clock tonight, where I'll go through in a bit more detail as well.
Okay. It might be a very short break. So we're on item 8, which is the general fund budget and capital programme update. So if there are questions, ask them now. If not, we'll move on. Andy?
Thank you. I'm running around in my notes. I'm just checking I'm on the right one. So item 8. So page 3 talks about item 3, page 100, talks about slow progress. Can someone explain a little bit more about that, and has that now quickened up a bit? Thank you.
Yeah, just in terms of this, I reported this in November as well, so it's a bit of a common theme in terms of developing the budget proposals, delivering the savings. I think the organisational capacity has been stretched. Things have been slower than I'd like them to be. That led into the council effectively on the officer side initially setting up things as an emergency response. So setting up a gold command structure, the same as what you do if there was a flooding event or something like that. That was followed by the executive also declaring a financial emergency and putting us onto that footing to give the impetus to drive things. There has been significant changes over the last month to drive those things forward, but we most probably lost a month or so during the period.
Thank you. Next question is in page 118 of the report. It says there will be things that we have to stop doing and those that we'll continue to do will need to be done in a different way, and actually talks about AI to replace staff. I suppose I struggle slightly with that comment because most of these services we've been talking about today, the pressures around children's and adults, and most of that is sort of hands-on, one-to-one care. So I'm trying to understand what that's going to mean with things we're going to have to stop doing and those we'll continue to do will need to be done in a different way. So how will we do that, and is there the capacity within the organisation given the staff pressures and change to do that? Thank you.
So the business case coming forward in January will start to flesh out some of this in a bit more detail. If I perhaps break it down into something, so children's services, you just heard the pressures they face, and particularly with recruiting social workers to support the service to help reduce our costs, get children in foster caring rather than placements, all of those things, absolutely. Will AI make a difference to that? Not hugely, but if we look at the admin side, so within children's services, there are 300 admin staff. Actually, if we can start to streamline those processes, if we can streamline how we process invoices, for instance, we've heard the numbers going through the system there. It's those sorts of things, I think, where AI will make a real difference, actually. The positive around that is, of course, our finance system, you'll hear about that in a minute, is a Microsoft product. So actually having what's the Microsoft AI thing is called Copilot, and we are just getting some licenses to start using that. Using that across the whole suite of Microsoft things suddenly opens up a whole new world. I think the problem is we don't quite know what's the things that we could change and make more efficient at this point in time. You kind of know there's something there. I don't think we quite know exactly how efficient that can make us and what's the right things. But I think if I describe it as more as the admin-y functional type of stuff as opposed to, I don't think that will change how many social workers you have, for instance. But it's more how we can make us more as efficient as an organisation.
Thank you. I think it's quite exciting actually in some areas. I'll wait to see, and hopefully the new system dynamics will assist with that moving forwards. So next question's around 118, and it says we will be a council that will be flexible and agile, reducing the need for complex systems of governance. I always get concerned when I read reducing the need for complex systems of governance. I think we heard from our previous speaker actually that governance is quite an important part of a council. So I'm just trying to understand a little bit more about what that means.
Yeah, it's a really good point, and I'd absolutely echo you. When you look at the Grant Thornton report, the failures in other councils, yes, they're finance related, a lot of them are governance related. Actually, that's been the key drivers in most of, well, virtually every single 114. It's a governance failure that's led to a financial failure, not the other way around. It's around, I suppose, looking at things through slightly different lenses. So if I use the example, it's not true anymore, but under the old SAP system, if I wanted to authorise somebody's leave, there's 3 processes I have to go through that. For me to sign off an order of £2 million is one click of a button. It doesn't feel like we've got the governance process quite right for the risks we face as a council. So it's looking at those sorts of things. It's certainly not doing away with governance, but it's putting appropriate governance around the right things rather than everything. We've inherited 5 different councils' ways of doing it, 5 different cultures, and I think there's a real chance to actually get the slickest and best, but actually not throw the baby out with the bathwater at the same time.
Thank you, relieved. You still need an audit committee, thank you very much. The last one for me, I've got more, but we're time conscious. So the next one really is around starting a consultation and engagement process on the savings proposals identified. I think it's fair to say there's been a lot of concerns raised around towns and parishes and precepting right around the county. I think that we've all heard that as councillors. What I'm trying to understand with that engagement process is, when will it start? I don't think it will ever start early enough now to fit in with the towns and parishes timelines for budgeting. With regards to sort of impacts assessments, etc., it's not long now between now and our budget setting in Feb. So I'm just trying to understand a little bit around timelines and consultation and engagement. Thank you.
Liz, do you want to respond?
Yeah, Chair, I'm quite happy to talk about the meetings I've attended, the LCNs, the parish councils, and the SALC AGM recently, where Bill Revans was the keynote speaker and I took finance questions. So I was also able to, I'll refer you back to my answer to Nigel Behan's question, refer back to how I used to work, where I was in a public sector facility, a theatre, that was funded by its local parish council, but which drew on all the smaller villages around for audience, but only Street Parish Council funded it. So when I was looking at street precepting, I was really concerned about street precepting as one of the bigger councils in the area. I didn't worry at all about what the smaller villages around did, because their precepts were so small and they didn't contribute. The audiences who came from those villages contributed in a different way. So I think what's really important, and where David Mears from Bridgewater Town Council was really interesting in his presentation to the SALC AGM, was if those bigger parish, town, city councils are kind of right on top of it, and David Mears explained their strategy working across, and he'd got to the stage of actually predicting some figures of how that might play out for Bridgewater Town Council and then across the whole of Somerset. If those bigger town, parish, city councils are on top of that now, for me, there's a lesser concern that the smaller parishes don't yet know what they need to do. And I made the point that whenever that letter went out from Bill Revans, it would be the wrong time for someone. But what was really important was that it went out early enough with its attached list that the bigger councils could consider. And actually, at Mendip, we went through, Ros White, if she's still on the call, she'll remember, we went through a process where every one of the Mendip towns and a lot of the parishes actually put in their list of assets that they would like devolved to them. So there are places, including Bridgewater, that have done a lot of preliminary work on that, and that already know. I've been copied into masses of emails that have gone into the devolution inbox. It will never be enough time, I appreciate that, and it will never be at the right time of year, but I think it was really important that that letter went out when it did. I think there will be a really interesting 2 or 3 years ahead as towns and parishes really get their heads around transparency reports, who owns what within their boundary, and what the opportunities are for them. And I've seen some really interesting suggestions already. I've been really impressed by LCNs and parishes I've attended. Thank you.
Or is it a direct follow-up?
Yes.
So can we limit, can you
just the follow-up,
make it as brief as possible, please?
Just to say, I think Bridgewater's in a separate place because it's already been on this journey prior to now, and I don't think the rest of even the larger towns and parishes are quite in that same place, understandably, because they haven't had that input for the previous 12 months. And I think 2 to 3 years is optimistic. I think if you go 5 to 10, it's probably near the mark. Thank you.
Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mine is a general one for Jason, really. I look at it from a private business point of view, and if you don't, at the end of the day, increase your income to an acceptable level, you're not going to make it. Borrowing your way out of bankruptcy doesn't sound a great reason to give the auditor that you're going to survive. Capitalisation, very short term. It's got a long-term sting in its tail, though, for paying back. So looking at what we can raise around the area, it's already been mentioned, and most of my questions have been mentioned. But the point is, what we will do will be a slow burn. We still need that kick in the pants of a larger income increase. Now, there's only one way that I can see on the board of doing that, and that is our precept. So while are we perhaps pushing hard at the moment that we have plans that will make us stable, but we don't know how much, and I for one am unhappy with the plans as well, because you're taking it down to the bone. You don't know how close to the bone that really is going to be, and how many services we're not providing that really are still needed. But we need that income. So surely there must be some reasonable way forward to get leave, if you like, to increase our precept. If not, then do we consider biting the bullet and saying, okay, we've got plans. We'll have to make plans if the inspector come in. The inspectors will cost us an extra $1 million a year for 3 years, but we can then increase our precept hopefully with that. And long term, that will give a good future for Somerset, rather than having a skeletal council in a few years' time.
Thanks, Norman. So I'll let Jason respond and then I'll bring Liz in. But I'd like comments to be brief, please.
I think your analysis of our situation is pretty on the money. I don't think the council has any difference to a business in terms of, our costs are growing more than our income. Therefore, we can't cut some of those costs because of the nature of them, and the demand-led services and the legalities around that. Therefore, you need to grow your income. Absolutely. We are, however, bound by being local government. Our grants are set by government. We can't, we know the details of those next week, but there's not going to be any big surprises in there. The only other area then is looking at council tax. We are also bound by government in terms of how much we can increase that by in terms of the referendum limits. Now, you could go out to a public referendum. I have looked at the mechanism for that again. There's only been one other referendum in the country that's happened, and they've unanimously lost 79% voting against it. We could try it in the room. Who wants to pay more council tax, please? It doesn't work very well, does it? The however bit, as part of the financial papers released by government last week in the lead up to the finance settlement, they have said they will consider councils making representations about increasing council tax as part of the exceptional financial support package. So that is something I'm actively looking at with DLUC. There's no details around it. If I look at the other councils that issued Section 114s last year, Croydon was allowed to increase their council tax by an extra 15%, Thurrock and Slough by 10%. So if I was crystal ball gazing, I would say the maximum you're likely to get is to be able to increase council tax by 10%. We've already built in the 5%. It's an extra 5%. That's roughly about an extra £17.2 million.
Liz.
There is some kind of irony involved in this, in that in order for Jason to speak to DLUC, one of the first questions he was asked was, does this council hold commercial investment? There's an income line in our budget of just under 20 million for the income from those commercial investments. So it's pretty obvious, isn't it, as we divest those commercial investments, we lose income there. That's something that we need to bear in mind. On a capitalisation direction, that can be funded one of two ways. Jason will correct me if I get anything wrong. It can either be by borrowing, where you pay PWLB plus 1%. That does not appeal at all. Or it can be from sale of assets. So if we hold the level of borrowing the same and divest some of those commercial investments, then there is money coming in that can fund capitalisation direction. If we sell assets that are council assets, and there is always a pipeline from, and so we've got a pipeline from all 5 councils. So then there is no borrowing to pay back on those, but obviously they have to be assets that are, they go through an official process, a proper process to be declared. I can't remember, Ros White will remind me of what the term is, but surplus. So there is a proper process. There is now an asset management group that takes those decisions. And then we are considering everything. My experience on a budget, a tiny fraction of this size, is actually when you make a difference, you work on both sides, on your income and on your expenditure, and that's when you've got a chance of success. So we will look at everything. Thank you.
Sorry, it's on this question of whether or not we should sell assets. I mean, that entirely depends on the asset. If it's producing a reasonable income and we are able to afford the repayments on it, then to sell that, particularly in a market which is slightly depressed, doesn't make any sense at all to anybody. I mean, we end up losing an asset and losing the income and getting absolutely naff all for it. So to me, that just strikes me as madness. So I would struggle if that was to be put in front of us. You know, we've got an asset that's returning a decent return and paying for itself. Why sell it at a loss? It's madness.
I think DLUC asked us to consider or have a plan for sale of the assets. I don't think they actually required the sale.
If I can just add to that, if we haven't got the capital receipts and get into capitalisation direction, we have to borrow from PWLB. PWLB rates roughly about 5.5% roughly, plus a 1% premium, so 6.5, plus you do an MRP over 20 years, so another 5%. So your cost of your new borrowing is 11.5%. So as long as the asset's earning more than 11.5%, you keep it. If it's less than 11.5% net return, you'd actually be better off coming out of the commercial investment because your new cost of borrowing now is exceptionally high.
Okay, Liz, is this pressing?
Really quickly, the decision was made on one day. It's a programme of work over a period of time. It's not that word that nobody is allowed to use, fire sale. It's not.
Okay, fine. Are members content to note the contents of the report? We've had a reasonable discussion. Ideally, we'd have liked more time, but we are pushed. So this will be coming before full council next week. So get another bite of the cherry then. Okay. Fine. So moving on, I'm conscious Jason's got to get out of here by 4 o'clock to write the presentation for 5 o'clock. So I'm going to scrap the previously advertised break. Sorry. So we're going to push on and we're going to go to item 5, which is the financial emergency assurance update. So Jason.
I'll do a quick intro, then we have got a presentation, so that I think covers most of the points here. And just thank my colleagues at various that have helped pull this together. One of the key things and one of the drivers behind this meeting was, as you as an audit committee, have you got assurance? And the response of the meeting was, no, we haven't, hence having this meeting. And I think that was a very sensible decision. And if you look at all those councils and you saw the Grant Thornton National Report, actually one of the things that's happened in all the councils with financial failure is the audit committee were nowhere. You know, they just weren't at the races on these things and weren't highlighting them. So you're already ahead of everything else. But what we've tried to do in this presentation here is pull together some of the key themes that hopefully do provide you with some assurance around a lot of the areas. That's not to say everything is perfect, because it's not. I'm looking at Scott now, because you're going to do the first bit on this, aren't you, Scott? And I'm going to hand over to Scott.
Thank you, Jason. Again, just to highlight, I know we've got a covering report for this as well in your information pack. Again, you'll see there that covering report sets out an overview of the council's governance framework, but there's also some helpful further guidance that's been provided by the Local Government Association in appendices 1 and 2 as well, around how local assurance works for councils across England. The other thing I would also highlight, section 17 of that covering report just provides some potential helpful questions for committee members to consider when looking at assurance frameworks. I'm also conscious, again, particularly of your own time, we will be circulating this PowerPoint presentation after the meeting as well to all members, but also publishing it on the website. And then finally, I'll also be working through a number of these slides, only just picking out key points, not word for word or line for line. So particularly on this first slide, you'll see here in terms of how the council operates, many of you already know, and for me, the key thing to draw out here in a governance framework is that point around councillors are democratically accountable to the residents of their division. You will know full well that process, not least of which in terms of what the Constitution provides, but to the process of election. And again, what's unique to local government is many other public sector organisations don't have that same level of democratic accountability to local residents. So the next slide, I've just touched on in terms of the council's constitution. Many of you will be aware of this. Again, the key thing I'd draw out from the constitution, particularly it sets out the rights of members, but also the rights of our residents in terms of engaging and participating with the decision making and the processes that the council has. The Constitution also interestingly sets out the functions and powers of its committees, the scheme of delegation, which sets out our decision-making arrangements, but also the financial regulations and contract procedure rules. Again, you'd have heard from a number of the presentations today how they play a part in terms of our assurance and control framework. The next slide, again, just reminding you of your own roles as councillors, but also your colleagues that make up the 110 members of this council. And again, I'd just flag the key part that members play in terms of policy setting, policy development, equally in terms of, you'll hear, in terms of the medium-term financial plan, the budget framework, all of those reserved for councillors to consider either at scrutiny committees or at the executive, but ultimately on an annual basis as part of the budget setting meeting in February. The next slide, again, just a quick visual reminder of the various committees that the council has and how those committees then report through to full council, but also how they also have a responsibility towards, particularly in terms of scrutiny, holding the executive to account and providing that critical friend role in terms of constructive challenge. The next slide, again, just reminding you, much of this articulated in your own terms of reference, and many hopefully will remember that the terms of reference you operate in very much drawn from the SITFA guidance in terms of how you operate. But again, these are some of the areas in particular of your own functions and responsibilities. We've touched on the executive quite a number of times through this afternoon, and again, just a reminder of the executive, particularly in terms of that responsibility for both developing, overseeing strategies, but also making recommendations to full council. Overview and scrutiny has been referenced several times. Again, overview and scrutiny, I'll probably draw out clearly that point around holding to account. A very underused phrase, but we have heard it several times today, is also that point about critical friend, and particularly scrutiny can offer that helpful oversight, particularly that foresight as well in terms of looking at future commissioning challenges and looking at areas of potential improvement. And again, scrutiny can complement audit and vice versa in terms of the assurance framework. Again, just a reminder in terms of the appendices, apologies, these aren't particularly clear in terms of these slides, but they are in your pack. These again just help provide those areas of assurance that exist. Just as reminders, many of these you've heard of in the previous presenters. And then this further slide again, just reminding you about how councils are accountable publicly. And again, that's another key point. I know I started with that area of around how councillors are democratically accountable, but certainly in terms of local government is highly regulated, also is highly transparent in terms of the services it provides, the money it spends. One of the things I know from an armchair auditor perspective, we heard reference earlier to things like the Spend Control Board. Many of you should hopefully be aware that under the Local Transparency Code, local government has been publishing since 2015 reports on a regular basis that set out areas of expenditure over £500. So for the armchair auditors out there, unlike other public sector organisations, local government publishes regularly areas where it regularly spends over £500. And at that point, I shall again just remind you of, as part of our assurance framework, many of you will be aware of what we know as the 3 lines of defence, again drawn from SITFA's guidance, which many councils operate. And again, you can see how our internal governance framework complement and work with audit committee, but also our scrutiny committees. The next slide, again, is just showing an overview visually in terms of our internal governance arrangements. I know you've heard some reference today, but what some of those involving our Transition and Transformation Board, our Performance, Risk and Budget Board, again, helping provide that support and assurance before reports are coming through to scrutiny and executive and to this committee as well. The next slide, again, just a reminder about our financial performance and risk management framework. Clearly, corporate leadership team are responsible in terms of those areas of management. But in terms of reporting, you'll know that there are regular reports, as you've heard again today, both to the executive, to the scrutiny committees, but also in terms of this body as well, particularly in terms of risk management. And the final slide in terms of our assurance framework is that regular reminder that certainly you'll be aware of as a committee, which is that the annual governance statement is one of those key documents that forms part of these statements of accounts every year, which again comes through this committee, which provides areas of assurance in terms of our governance framework, but also sets out areas for action and improvement for the forward year as well. So again, just highlighting in terms of our assurance framework, that transparency on how we identify areas that we want to improve upon.
Thanks, Scott. I just wanted to I don't know if it was my recollection of the meeting last time. Actually, I think a large part of the concern was about the new boards and new structures which have been put in place to manage the financial emergency, rather than necessarily the overall existing governance structure. Because what happened is we've materially changed the governance and control environment because we put these additional boards and structures in place. And I think we were all a bit, well, confused might be the best way of putting it, in terms of exactly what each of those boards is doing, where it's reporting, when, how. So will you be covering that later on in the presentation?
That was covered in the earlier budget monitoring report, actually. It lists all the different boards within there. So it set out the 3, I call them financial control boards, plus the 2 on the placement panels that involve adults and children's. But we have got, sorry, as part of this risk bit, next bit, we are picking up on some of the things that has come out of the financial emergency and some of the risks around that side of things as well. So it does hopefully tie all in.
Okay, I don't know, members, if my recollection is slightly different to everyone else's, but.
Thank you. It was similar, and I actually think this item was headed as financial emergency assurance update. So I got confused because that was the title in the of the papers. Yet the paper we had, I wasn't sure if we were missing a paper. That's my question. I've got some questions on the paper that are here, but the two didn't seem to tally.
Yeah, okay. If you can carry on with the presentation, please.
I think it's over to me. Who's running the slides? There we go. Okay, so we have a policy and strategy, and we have user manuals. We have all sorts in place already for risk management. The financial emergency doesn't change any of that. That is still the backbone of what we do with risk management. But the financial emergency did include some additional work that we will be doing, the things that are listed there. Our reporting lines are still CLT, audit committee, executive when we can get there. So that doesn't change. We are in regular meetings with SWAT, i.e. the guy sitting to my left, where we just basically talk risk. And it's any subject to do with risk. Next slide. So it's all right, my laptop's packed up and I'm struggling to read the slides. It's all right. So the structure of the emergency was, as Jason alluded to earlier, that commands were set up. So you have a gold, you have a silver, and you have a bronze. So gold command is the strategic level, and obviously silver is technical and bronze is operational, usually. So we have identified some risks at the moment that sit at the gold level. So these are in addition to our strategic risks. So we have 6 gold risks at the moment. They are listed in the slide at the moment. We have the MTFP assurance group, and we have savings pro formas that all services have filled out. They have also made some basic risk management risk assessment in those things. Once we are the other side of this, Angela and I have got quite a bit of work to do in chasing down those savings that have been taken, because formal risk assessment will then need to be done. At the moment, like I say, they've only identified things at the red, amber, green level, which is, not very comprehensive. Next slide, please. So, impact assessment. Angela is heavily involved in that work because that's the other half of her job title. We will need to consider, when we have a cumulative impact assessment, the risk involved in that, which may be hidden to other people, but we will sit and go through those and come out with what the cumulative risk impact is of EIA. There is a statutory officers group. Jason alluded to that one earlier too. And we also have the MTFP assurance group. Now, this is an officer-led group, officer level group. Angela and I are on that group. I'm for risk, Angela's on fringe. EIAs for the equality assessment side of life. So the risks that you see in front of you, the majority have come from that MTFP assurance group. So they cover things about compliance with regulation around consultation. They include things like actually complying with impact assessments and how and the why and the when that you do those kind of things. So there are 6 in total at the moment of those. This will probably grow. We do expect it to grow. And like I say, once we get into having the savings known for definite, then we've got additional work to do, which will bolster this register, but will be at the silver level. So that's the additional work on top of. Is there another slide? I can't remember. No.
Assume this is going to be circulated. Yeah. Okay.
Chair, I'm struggling with this because we haven't had sight of it. So
Yeah.
I've got questions on item 5 as published. And I'm not quite sure how this relates to what we've had circulated.
Okay. So I think that our concerns were largely around the new stuff that had been set up, and that's what we were expecting to get a report on. I don't know if maybe it wasn't, we hadn't framed that clearly enough. So I think this next bit is actually relevant, but for a different reason. So this is about the dynamics update, but I share your concern, Mandy, because it's not really helpful because we couldn't really see the risk table, for example, and it might be that we need to delve into some of that. So I think probably if we can circulate the presentation and then ask questions electronically around that, but we haven't really got the time to delve into that in any great detail. So I think this bit is actually quite relevant because it sort of underpins the rest of the assurance around the financial reporting. So can we do this bit quickly and then are we able to move on then?
Okay, hi. So I haven't been to audit committee for a while, and I know you want to speed up time, but one of those things around assurance, excuse me, sorry. One of the things about assurance then, so I'm the newly appointed head of corporate finance, and within that, that's systems, accounting, exchequer. So that's our income raising and our debt recovery and things like paying invoices. So that's what I mean by exchequer, and financial governance and transformation. So these are actually quite a lot of those assurance, finance, transactional stuff. And actually all of those things I've worked for local authority for 20 years, so my experience is all in those areas. So as we look at how do we move forward from some of the journey of the collaboration, bringing 5 councils together as one and a new finance system, this is where I'm going to lead these areas in terms of how do we get that assurance in terms of what's presented to you for decision making. So to speed up the time then after that introduction, the next 4 slides really are just about there was a journey in implementing a new finance system called Microsoft Dynamics 365. And this mantra of we're going to adopt the system, not adapt the system, which is a new way for us to work. Normally you'd break the system apart and get it to do everything that we want it to do, but actually trying to bring 5 together to 1, that was impossible anyway. So the focus in terms of what was going to be ready for go live for the new authority. You can see lots of green in here. Just to explain some acronyms, especially when you're coming back to look at this. So MVP is what we might say is minimum viable product in terms of project speak. That would be you've got something functioning, but it will function as a standard functioning system. We might want to do more with it. An ISV is independent software vendor. Dynamics works as very much as a platform, and you have then third-party applications that overlay that to enhance that functionality, which is the bit that we're tailoring then to give us some of the reporting that we need. Solver is very much an example of that, about our budget management and our budget forecasting and capture. And that tool there is the bit that we're working towards, about where we get our governance and assurance about how we manage our budget, move our budget, and how we report on the budget as a particular example. If we could just move through the few slides then, as something to absorb then, and I'm more than happy to come back and answer questions around the journey of the implementation of the system. This one here then around, we went live with the finance system on the 17th of April. A lot of activity across different headings to go forward to October, November, which is where we are now, where we've moved from this idea about a functioning system to a fully functional system. And along that route, some of that strengthening our governance and controls. Some of the particular examples in there around duplicate payment prevention. So with a stretched budget, we don't want to be paying more than what we have to, particularly if then we're going to struggle to recover it because we've paid. So to give that assurance, we've got proactive measures in place with other systems that detect, so we prevent that duplication rather than actually go, what is it, and try and recover it, but we also do recover as well. Right through down to, we talked earlier from Scott around transparency reporting, which was something I was going to mention, and we do publish that, and we publish that on a quarterly basis. And we're able to get financial information out of the system right through into Solver. That's been a journey from August, but budget holders are now provided with their budget information, and they work closely with their finance business partners. If I move to the next slide, but just take note that this says go live in April through to November. This slide is something from a service called Gartner. So Gartner are an independent, from us, market expert on research for technology implementation. We're within this timeline where you go from site system implementation May through to November, where you have stable system, which I've been saying is fully functional. But note at the top here that this says for a single system ERP. We've taken 5 to 1 as well within this same timeline. So it's something not to underestimate. We move to the next slide. Oh, sorry, back one again.
So I'm sorry, Ben. We're going to have to move on shortly. Can you give us the really key headlines on where we are with Dynamics? Is it working as it needs to work? If it's not, what are the mitigations that you're going to put in place?
We just go to the slide just before, please. And before that one. And before that one, please. This one here about system controls. Is the system working in? Is it a controlled system? Was the one I was going to reference to next. So you can see here, red, amber, green, not the natural risk, red, amber, green. Anything that's amber is controlled, but we're working on and making strengthen and improvements in terms of going to green in terms of what we want to do. And you can see when you're able to see the slides that are sent around, the system is controlled, everything's up and working with reference to that last slide. And there's things around how do we, I won't speak now, but how do we move forward with AI, make things more efficient, and how do we get reporting more smarter and etc. out of there. If I can move to the next one that talks about reporting. So I think it's the next slide. And the one after that, please. Reporting capabilities, which is really important. This just says we can get financial information out of the system to make informed decision making, and that we're looking at all of the Power Platform stuff, which is Power BI, Power Automate, all of those smart things that we might want to move forward with, and some of the improvements that we want to make to those moving forward. I'll stop here because I can see you're pressing. I happily take questions.
Sorry, I think probably for future reference, it's easier for members if we've got presentations pre-circulated, so that we can review them and then we can come to you with questions, because actually the useful part of this conversation is about members being able to challenge what has gone on, or to get assurance around what officers have been doing. So we've heard what you've done. Now we haven't really got the opportunity to delve into too great a detail. And there's no disrespect, there's nothing about your presentation, I'm sure it was brilliant, but we're under real-time pressure and we've got to move on. So Mandy.
Just very, very quickly, I think there's a lot that's interesting here. We obviously can't read it because it's too far away. I'm just wondering whether perhaps a members briefing could pick this up, just as a suggestion.
Yeah, two things. Very happy to do a members briefing, certainly on Dynamics, but also just to plug the next scrutiny committee on the 4th, thank you, 4th of January has a report on Dynamics, and we'll also have a more full presentation on what Ben's gone through there, where we've gone, etc. And can I just cover off, if this hasn't quite hit the mark on what the committee, I'll take full responsibility. I thought.
No, I'll take responsibility. I probably should have been clearer with what we were expecting. So I think there's just a misalignment there of what we were perhaps expecting. So, okay. So, do you want to ask any questions based on the report that was in the pack?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Hurrah! Interesting report, actually, and gave me some nice bedtime background reading on the SIP for delivery of good governance, which I went and read. It's really interesting to know that it was written in 1617, and I thought if you go back to 1617, we are in a whole different place, councils right around the country, to what we are, and I actually think it could do with a bit of a refresh, if I'm honest. So there we are, I'll leave that with auditors to have a look at. For me, the report was interesting in some respects, and it says, read the governance statement, which we've touched on here. We have to be sure how effective our governance arrangements are, how they're monitored, how they're evaluated, and any planned changes in the coming period. I don't think we've quite ticked that box as an audit committee. We go back and look at that SIP for code. And I've got lots of questions, but I'll just ask one for brevity. Item 15, let's go back, sorry. 17, which is what we need to be doing for good governance. And there's a list of questions there. Does the audit committee have the assurance it needs to meet its responsibilities and ensure the organisation meets its statutory responsibility? Does effective assurance exist across all areas, etc., etc.? I don't think I could answer any one of those questions fully. I'll just leave it there. I think there's work to do, Chair.
And I think, Alistair, that you've been working through the self-assessment for audit committee, so that's on. I believe that's on the work plan anyway, isn't it?
Yeah, if it's okay, I'm happy to circulate that to all members. I know I shared it with the chair and vice chair on work that needs to be done. And I will just say at this point as well, if you haven't completed the skills survey, please do, because it will influence the training and development programme that we're putting together for you as a committee.
Melanie?
The only comment I would make is, for me, it's nigh impossible for an audit committee to have that assurance because it covers every aspect of this council. And for me, some of the things, does effective assurance exist across all areas? I don't know how we could ever answer that as a committee. It's a big organisation. So I suppose I'm challenging what's there and saying, is that realistic and is it achievable? And with my experience of audit over a number of years, I'm not sure that it is. So that's my question.
So I think, yes, please, to circulating that information. I think we put it formally on the agenda because I think it normally comes with does it come later on in the year? The self-assessment.
Yeah, so usually it's looking back retrospectively over the year, and it should feed in as part of your annual report for council, whether you've been effective as an audit committee.
So effectively, by sharing it with us a few weeks ago, what we were doing was just checking where we were at. I think that probably ought to be a standing item on the agenda, really, to check where we're at.
I think if you could slot it in for March, I think committee in March is towards the end of March, so you can look back over the year to make sure it's timely going to full council, which I think a report goes June time.
Okay, thanks. Any other questions? If not, I'm going to move on. Okay. Apologies to the committee. I think we've just had a slight misalignment there of our expectations, so we'll look harder on that for next time. But I think thank you for the team for putting the presentation together. I know you've got to go, Jason, so if you head off and leave us in Nikki's capable hands. Thank you. So I guess it's difficult for us to answer the next questions, which are, does the committee have assurance about the structures which are in place to manage the financial emergency? Because we haven't got clarity on that from my perspective. Does anyone disagree?
Can I just add though, you need to be really careful here because you as members, actually, you have seen everything. This report does cover all the governance stuff within the council. Those boards that we've set up that are in the budget monitoring report are around expenditure controls, additional controls we've put in as officers, results of which you see in the budget monitoring. So you do see that, but they are, as Nikki said, the expenditure control board is literally that. It's saying you've got an order over £100, is that required, etc. We can provide more details on that, and I'm very happy to do that. All I'm saying is within the whole governance framework, actually that's a very minor thing compared to all the other parts you've got here. So you need to take it as a whole rather than just the other part.
Point taken. I think it's possibly that we lack understanding of what the new boards have been set up to do and how they're operating, how are they performing against whatever terms of reference they've got. I don't know. I haven't seen any terms of reference for them. I don't know.
There is no more terms of reference than is in that budget monitoring report. If they review or spend over £100, the review all vacant posts. But we can send more
Fine. Well, look,
details around if that's
let's
helpful.
take that away and we'll work out how to unpick that and come back with more for next time. Okay. All right. Okay. Alistair, do you want to provide us some light relief?
Chair, you'll have to forgive me. I'm due to another meeting. It was actually meant to be in here at 4 o'clock.
Chair.
Michelle's booted them out. We can stay. No, that's fine, Simon. No problem. Where was it? Right, Alistair.
Thank you, Chair. As it's been quite a long committee, I will keep this short as I can. One thing I just wanted to say, given the conversations I've heard during this committee, whether you know about them or not, assurance maps can be useful. Some people like them, some people loathe them, but it's to map out what assurances are in place against a particular area. Sometimes they could be mirrored against the strategic risk register. It could be mirrored against financial risks. In my point of view, something we are working on in the background is trying to build up an assurance picture across the whole organisation, which is often done as a no-no because that's quite a big undertaking, but it's something we're trying to do so we know from an internal audit point of view what assurances are out there. You know, you've heard about scrutiny, the various scrutiny committees, what is going where, so we are trying to build up a picture. If we finally get around to completing that, I will definitely share that with you as a committee so you understand what other assurances are out there in this organisation. In terms of the report in front of you, one of the things that the chair asked me is just to highlight where our work is falling that helps to give an insight and assurance around financial sustainability, given the financial pressures the authority is facing. So first of all, I'll just draw your attention to agenda page 89. This just highlights our coverage, as I wanted to say, from our audit plan this year against the strategic risks. We do slice and dice our audit plan many different ways because there is no one right way of analysing where your audit coverage should be. Obviously, strategic risks is important. It was mentioned in the presentation by Grant Thornton, absolutely, but that's only important if the strategic risks are in the right areas. So we do look at our audit plans many different ways, which includes strategic risks, healthy organisation themes, and SWOT top 10 risk themes as well to make sure we've got reasonable coverage across the organisation. I would also just highlight we normally do our coverage over a rolling 2-year period. As this is a new authority, obviously the 1st of April was our starting point. So there will be more reds where there is no coverage because we don't have the wider 24-month history that we would usually have across an organisation. In terms of just trying to kind of justify where our work is falling and why, we've benchmarked it around the SIP for Financial Management Code 2019, and that highlights 5 key areas of what should be operating effectively in an organisation to give a degree of assurance. If you're getting it right, it should be financially well managed. So our work is aligned around getting routine financial management right, planning and managing capital well, using performance and benchmarking information effectively, having clear plans for delivering savings and monitoring those, and managing reserves well. So on agenda page 91, this outlines the work that we're currently planning to do and some work we're not planning to do. So where it says 23-24, it's obviously in the plan for this year. Where it says placeholder, so I did circulate to this committee back in April our audit placeholder document that analyses all the potential audits we could do across this organisation. MTFP, for example, being one in there. That is not currently in our audit plan for us to do, but it is something that's on our radar that we could do it in the future if we needed to. It also highlights some of the audits that we're planning to do in 24, 25 and where our coverage is falling. And I have shared with you last week the more detailed information around scoping and background information. So you will have that as well. In addition to those reviews, we are doing bespoke targeted reviews. So those are listed on agenda page 92. Obviously looking through the financial systems controls, also looking at children looked after placements and contracts, particular areas where there's been huge spend pressures as well. There's obviously more areas in the authority for us to look at, and we will be diverting resources where necessary to some of those areas. Agenda page 93, so again, to give some assurance to the audit committee around routine financial management, is making sure that the routine financial system controls are operating effectively. So the table here on agenda page 93 summarizes that assessment of those controls. And again, I've sent you or circulated to you last week a detailed document of the individual controls, where they are effective and where they're not. So you've got that for your information. Obviously, the authority is working to make sure they do become 100% effective. And we are doing some more detailed work around some of these areas, such as main accounting, accounts payable, and accounts receivable. As I say, they're key fundamental systems that do feed into the financial statements. Just for your information, again, Financial Management Code, Appendix A and B, this is just in here for reference to make sure you are aware of the key financial standards that an authority should be operating to. This isn't one way that we'd slice our audit plan, but I'm more than happy to start analysing our coverage against some of these standards so you can build up whether you get the right assurance that these standards are in operation in this authority. As Councillor Chilcott did mention, obviously the SIP for Solace framework was 16-17. This financial management framework is 2019, and things may have moved on, but those standards are set in stone at the moment, and the authority should be operating to those standards. And then Appendix B just highlights key things to look out for if there is financial stress in an organisation. I think at the moment we know there is financial stress in this organisation given the budget pressures, but there are some other things there just to keep on your radar as an audit committee. If you see these things coming to fruition, does it point to financial pressures? So in essence, it's not a usual update report, but it's just to highlight where our work is falling, just to address or give some assurance around some of the key financial system areas, key finance governance areas. And excuse me. And I'd just like to conclude, just to make you aware, we are going to be rolling an audit committee training session generic at the end of January, early February, so keep an eye out for that. There will be a more bespoke members training session scheduled for May, and we'll also be looking at making sure all the SWAT partners come along to that to help give you some networking opportunities with other audit committee members on other authorities throughout the country as well. And that training will be bespoke to particular needs. So hence, if you do complete the skills matrix, I can make sure that we address any shortfalls in knowledge in those sessions. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Alistair. Mandy.
Thank you. Just a very quick one. I think when we did the skills assessment last time, most of it I didn't know what it was talking about. So hopefully I'll be able to understand it a bit better this year. I live in hope. My question was around not working on ORG 0065, which was recruitment and retaining staff. For me, that underlines much of what we're wanting to do as a council. I think with the financial pressures and the whole organisation probably going to have to go through some level of redundancies given the where the budget is. I think for me it's a real risk to this council retaining staff at the moment, and I am sure there are, while we've read it in some reports, some areas are very short of staff. So I'm just concerned that that's an area that's not being worked on, and I'm just wondering what the reason and rationale was for that, please.
That's a great question. The reason and rationale, we have got a number of placeholder audits lined up underneath that risk. The officer that we would normally have engaged with to discuss those sorts of areas of work left around September time. So we haven't engaged with the new officer as of yet to focus on gets the okay for which reviews we can do in that area. What we are acutely aware of is at the moment a number of HR officers are obviously very tied up in terms of the restructuring that's going on in the authority. So that is a pressure that we have to be mindful of, and obviously you have to weigh up in the balance of, is there enough resource in that area to have a number of audits undertaken to give a good airing of that risk? And obviously, if part of the direction of this committee is no, we do want coverage, then I can obviously take that forward as a discussion with the relevant officers.
I suppose the only pushback from me personally would be, can we afford not to do it? I know it's time and everybody's pressured. Is there a risk in not doing it? That would be my challenge.
Lindy.
Thank you, Chair. On page 89, you listed the strategic risks, which is about 12 or 13. I'm just a bit confused with the presentation that was made previously of the 6 strategic risks. If it's different strategic risks. And then on page, the controls that's not in place, the 13% on page 93, you said you did circulate the report. If I missed it, I'm sorry, but I didn't see that email. Just very quick summary of what controls are not in place in that 13%. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, just take them in backwards order, if that's okay. So in summary, if the main control deficiencies were around main accounting, and some of this is uploading out the, do you have the list next to you? I don't suppose you do.
I don't know.
No, sorry. Is it okay if I recirculate the email to you with it on? Because I don't have it to hand. But the main focus, as I said on there, is main accounting and the impact with feeder systems into MSD that's causing issues, and the backlog that needs to be resolved with where things hadn't been posted. So I think there was quite a large backlog in the suspense accounts. So suspense accounts being cleared quickly and efficiently was a control that wasn't operating effectively. But as I say, if you read the email, and I'll resend it to make sure it's there, you'll see the individual controls and a brief explanation of what they were. In terms of the risks that you mentioned, those are different risks, as those were bespoke to the financial emergency. So at the moment, those risks or those groups are quite new, I understand. So at the moment, we haven't gone through those risks and reflected those in any of our work. We are still using the key strategic risks through our work at the moment. Yep, go ahead.
Okay, so will it be updated with those emerging risks?
Yes, we will certainly take those into account. And I know, as the risk officer said, those risks are expected to grow. So keeping an eye on them and understanding what they are and how that may influence our work over the next 4, 6, 9 months, whatever it may be, definitely.
Thank you, Chair. One of the key things he wants to get today was assurance, obviously to do with like social care, especially adult social care. One of the key strategic risks, which is on page 89, which is ORG 0071, Adult Social Care Transformation Programme does not achieve its financial targets, i.e. its budgets. We're not actually started it or doing any coverage on it. Is there a reason why we're not doing that one? Thank you.
Now, again, it's a good question, and I think it would come back to the other assurances that are in place. There's a lot of scrutiny and oversight on the Adult Social Care Transformation Programme at the moment, as the executive director has said, regular reporting through to scrutiny committee. So for us, we have got an agreement that we'll be doing some work early in 24-25 on delivery of those savings, and I think the bulk of the savings are obviously programmed to be delivered later in 24-25.
If I can just come in on that, I think Mayor alluded to earlier and what Jason said about the delivery of that saving was delayed. So the Newton saving that was in has been delayed. So I think that's part of that saving, and therefore that's why we're comfortable at the moment that that audit is delayed in line with those savings. We know they're not deliverable. We know there's a delay that's going to feed into the next financial year. So I think it is prudent for that audit to be slightly delayed.
Andy.
That's okay, that's fine. Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions from the committee? Thank you, Alistair, for giving us an update.
Sorry, there was one thing I haven't mentioned, and I just wanted to mention it. If you could keep an eye on your inbox emails for early January, because we will be rolling out access to our data. So you'll have access and you will need to register and create a password, but you'll have real-time access to our data. So it'll save me having to send information out. And there is a section in there for useful publications that will have all the SIP for guidance documents that you can read through and criticise or whatever you need to do with them. But there will be relevant guidance there to help as well that should help you make sure that you're on board with being a good and effective audit committee.
Will we see the audits as well?
Yes, the final audit reports will be attached in there. So on the dashboard, you'll be able to click a link that will take you to the final audit reports. So you'll be able to read those as well. So hopefully it'll be easy to use and you'll be able to drill through the information.
Thank you, Alistair. Right, by my reckoning, that takes us to the final item on the agenda, which is the audit committee work plan. So January is looking incredibly heavy, incredibly heavy. Nikki, have you got some good news? Are we going to delay something?
I have got some good news. I don't know if it's good news, but I am going to delay. So on there, you've got a number of the external audit finding reports for a number of the legacy councils. The one for South Somerset District Council and Sedgemoor District Council, those will be delayed until March. They'll be removed in on March. At the moment, we're still anticipating the others will come forward in January.
Okay, that probably makes the meeting slightly more manageable, but I would suggest that members bring sleeping bags. Okay, Mandy.
I just asked the question. There has been so much extra work, understandably, with the 5 councils and a lot of outstanding audit reports. I don't know whether we should have scheduled in a couple extra during the year just to cover them off.
I have asked for extra committee meetings, but the only date we could find was this one. It's not really that helpful because to go through, normally an audit committee would be going through 2 audits a year, pension committee and the full council. But we've gone through, I can't even remember how many we've gone through this year, must be 6, 7, 8 and the rest. And it's got to the point now, to be honest, keeping track of which audits are still outstanding, which ones have been completed, has been quite a challenge. So I think you're absolutely right, Mandy. I think the team have tried to move at pace to try and close them down as quickly as they can to reduce the prospective risk to the council of having those audits open. But the ability of the committee to adequately, I mean, scrutinise, not in the sense of scrutiny, but to adequately scrutinise those audit reports when we've got so many. We were scheduled to have, well, a lot of external audit findings reports in January, and you just can't give them the time that they need.
I do have, as opposition spokes for resources, have one-on-ones with Nicola and Jason, and one of the points I picked up was actually there is so much that's rolled out of all the reports. It's just that assurance for me that that will get captured somewhere, because I said, in all honesty, I have lost track of some of it, and I think there was assurance given.
So yeah, I did assure that we will pick up all of the recommendations and all of those management responses to recommendations to feed into the 23-24 accounts. What I have said is I have given our external auditors a heads up that we are unlikely to meet the statutory deadline to produce a set of accounts for the new council by the end of May. That's just because of the team capacity to deliver on that. We've got a new financial system in place. I would like to produce a set of accounts that we know have been thoroughly checked, are accurate. So we're more likely to be working to a timetable of getting those produced by the end of September to allow.
But we wouldn't be alone in that.
We're definitely not alone. Definitely not alone. Actually, I know it's frustrating always looking back for legacy authorities. We're in a really, as a council, it might not seem it, but we are in quite a strong position with our audits in terms of the only one prior to 22-23 outstanding is South Somerset, which is hopefully being signed off next week. And then 22-23, we've already signed or already the audit committee has already seen Somerset West and Taunton, and that's just got to be finalised and signed off. And then the remainder will be done in January and March, and therefore then we can look forward.
Yeah, so there was always going to be a beastly amount of work to get through in this first year of the new council. All I can say is that in working as hard and as fast as we have done, actually it's about closing down those prospective risks to the opening balances of the subsequent years. So yeah, it's not an easy place to be by any stretch, but I think we've worked hard and we've done everything we can that's been required of us. But all we can do is reflect on those comments. I share them, Andy. It's a concern to not give it enough oversight. Okay, so there may be some movement from this. Okay, fine. Well, let's keep that under review, and we'll keep the committee updated when we've got more assurance about when that's happening. Okay. By my reckoning, that's the end of the meeting. Thank you everyone for staying with us to this point. I'm sorry it's dragged on, but I'm very happy to take feedback. Thank you. Have a nice Christmas, and we will see you all in January.